This video will help you sleep and relax. But before we begin, I would like to know which city you're from and what time you're watching this. Now, subscribe to the channel, relax, and let's begin. I still can't make sense of what happened to me last month. I've been trying to rationalize it, but I can't get past the feeling that something truly abnormal occurred that night. I need to write this down. Maybe someone here has experienced something similar. I grew up in San Martin, a small town in northeastern Argentina, but moved away when I was 19 to study in Buenos Aires. I visit my parents a couple times a year, but this time I decided to extend my stay for a week. My folks went to bed early as always, around 9, and by 11 I was feeling restless. It was a warm night with a nearly full moon, and I decided to take a walk through my old neighborhood. There's something special about walking through the streets where you grew up, especially at night when everything is quiet. The same houses, the same cracks in the sidewalk, the same trees, just older versions of what I remembered. I felt nostalgic but comfortable, like I was reconnecting with a part of myself. It was about midnight when I reached the old park where I used to play soccer with my friends. The streetlights cast long shadows across the empty playground. I sat on a bench for a while, smoking a cigarette and scrolling through my phone. That's when I first noticed her. She appeared at the far end of the park, walking in my direction. Even from a distance, something about her movement caught my attention. It wasn't exactly that she was walking fast. It was more like she covered ground quicker than she should have, like she was gliding rather than stepping. As she got closer, I could see she was wearing a deep blue dress that seemed to absorb the moonlight rather than reflect it. She looked to be in her 40s, thin but attractive in an unusual way. Her face had sharp features, and her hair was pulled back tightly, giving her an intense appearance. She was carrying what looked like a heavy bag of fruit. When she got within about 20 feet of me, she smiled. Not a warm smile, more like she recognized me, which was impossible since I didn't know her. "Beautiful night for a walk, isn't it?" she said, her voice oddly melodic, but with an accent I couldn't place. I nodded and mumbled something agreeable, hoping she would continue past. Instead, she stopped directly in front of me. "Would you mind helping me? This bag is very heavy, and I still have a way to go." Before I could respond, she asked, "Do you believe in respect?" The question caught me off guard. It wasn't phrased like a normal question, more like she was testing me. "Of course," I answered, feeling strangely compelled to please her. "Good, very good. That's important respect," she said, nodding as if confirming something to herself. I should have made an excuse and left right then. But there was something in her eyes. They were dark, almost black, and seemed to hold me in place. So I heard myself offering to help carry her bag. As I took it from her, our fingers brushed, and hers were ice cold despite the warm night. The bag was heavier than it looked, filled with apples and what looked like pomegranates. Some of the fruit didn't look quite right. The colors were off, too dark or too bright. "I live near the old train station," she said, pointing in the direction of the abandoned station that hadn't been used in decades. As we walked, she stayed unusually close to me. Every few steps, she would press lightly against my arm in a way that seemed both intimate and calculated. It wasn't exactly flirtatious. It felt more like she was measuring something about me. "You're from here, but you've been away," she stated, not a question. "How did you know that?" I asked. "I know many things about this town and the people who belong to it," she replied with a slight smile. "You've come back to remember, haven't you?" The way she said it made me uncomfortable, like she knew exactly why I had decided to take this midnight walk. We approached the old square near the abandoned train station. This part of town was largely deserted at night, with most of the surrounding buildings either abandoned or converted into storage facilities. The only light came from a single street lamp with a flickering bulb. "Let's rest for a moment," she said, indicating a bench in the square. As we sat down, I noticed a man approaching from the other side of the square. He was large, broad-shouldered, and was walking with a small child, probably his toddler, who was struggling to keep up. Behind them trotted a massive dog, some kind of shepherd mix with thick fur. The woman beside me stiffened slightly. Her eyes narrowed, focusing on the dog. As they got closer, something strange happened. The dog, which had been trotting obediently beside the man, suddenly stopped. It lifted its nose to the air and began sniffing frantically. Its eyes widened in what looked like confusion or fear. It started making a low whining sound I could hear even from 30 feet away. The man noticed his dog's behavior and looked in our direction, his face showing concern. The woman beside me smiled again, that same strange smile that didn't reach her eyes. When they were about 15 feet away from us, the woman stood up and took a step toward the dog. The animal's reaction was immediate and violent. It backed away, hackles raised, and started barking. Not aggressive barking, but the kind of barking dogs do when they're terrified. "What's wrong, boy?" the man asked his dog, clearly confused. The dog continued backing away, the barking turning to whimpering. The woman took another step forward and bent slightly, as if to reach out to the animal. That's when the man's face changed. He looked directly at the woman, then at me, and something like recognition flashed in his eyes. Not that he knew her, but that he understood something about the situation that I didn't. "Vamos, ahora!" he suddenly shouted at his child, grabbing the toddler's hand. He didn't even try to call the dog, which was already running, ahead of them. They quickly disappeared into the darkness, the man repeatedly looking back over his shoulder. The woman straightened up, watching them go with an expression I can only describe as hunger, before turning back to me. "Some animals are sensitive," she said casually, as if nothing unusual had happened. "Shall we continue? It's not much further now." We walked toward the old railway, entering a rougher part of town where most houses were falling apart. I was getting increasingly nervous. This area wasn't safe even during the day, and here I was at midnight with this strange woman. "I've known you for a long time, Martin," she said suddenly. I stopped walking. I hadn't told her my name. "How do you know my name?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She turned to face me, and in the dim light, her face seemed different somehow, older, with deeper shadows around her eyes. "I know many things," she whispered, leaning closer. "In my country, they call me Baba Yaga." My heart started pounding. I'm not superstitious, but everyone knows that name, the witch from Slavic folklore who eats children. A chill ran down my spine despite the warm night. "I need to go," I said, trying to sound casual while handing her back the bag. "My parents will be wondering where I am." "Your parents are asleep," she replied, taking the bag from me. "They won't wake until morning. You could stay with me for a while." The way she said it made my skin crawl. I forced a smile and took a step back. "Another time, perhaps," I said, amazed at how steady my voice sounded. She studied me for a moment, then nodded. "Yes, another time. We will meet again, Martin. I'm certain of it." I don't know what possessed me, but I leaned forward and quickly kissed her cheek goodbye, a common courtesy in Argentina. Her skin was cold and dry, like touching paper. I turned and walked away, forcing myself not to run. After about 50 feet, some instinct made me look back. She was standing exactly where I had left her, completely motionless, still staring at me. Even from that distance, I could see her eyes. They seemed to be glowing slightly in the darkness. Her mouth was curved in a smile that wasn't friendly or warm, but knowing, predatory. That's when it hit me. The feeling that this hadn't been a chance encounter, that she had been watching me, perhaps for years, waiting for me to return to this town, that she had orchestrated our meeting, knowing I would take that walk on that specific night. I turned and walked faster, then broke into a run when I was out of her sight. I didn't stop until I reached my parents' house, where I locked the door behind me and sat in the dark living room until morning. I'm back in Buenos Aires now, but I can't shake the feeling that I narrowly escaped something terrible that night. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night, certain that I can hear a light tapping at my window, even though I live on the 5th floor. And yesterday, at the market near my apartment, I could have sworn I saw a woman in a blue dress watching me from across the street. When I looked again, she was gone. I don't know who or what that woman was. I don't know why the dog reacted to her that way, or why that man grabbed his child and ran. All I know is that something was very wrong about her, something that went beyond ordinary human strangeness. And I can't shake the feeling that our story isn't over, that she meant what she said about meeting again. Story 2. I'm still trying to process what happened to me last weekend. I've been hiking solo for over 15 years, and nothing, absolutely nothing, has ever scared me like this. I've encountered bears, gotten lost in snowstorms, and even had a close call with hypothermia once. But this was different. This was my own body turning against me. I'd been planning this trip to Pine Hollow for months. It's about 4 hours from where I live, and it's known for being pretty isolated, exactly what I was looking for. I needed to clear my head after a brutal few months at work and a messy breakup. Nature has always been my reset button. I arrived at the trailhead around noon on Saturday. The weather was perfect, mid-60s, slight breeze, not a cloud in the sky. I'd studied the maps extensively beforehand and planned to hike about 7 miles in to set up camp near this small creek I'd read about online. The hike in was uneventful, just the way I like it. I passed a couple heading back to the trailhead about 2 miles in, but after that, I didn't see another soul. I reached my camping spot around 4 in the afternoon. It was even better than the pictures I'd seen. A small clearing about 30 feet from a crystal-clear creek surrounded by towering pines. The ground was relatively flat, perfect for pitching my tent, and there was a natural stone formation that would work great as a windbreak for my fire. I felt that familiar sense of peace wash over me as I set up camp. This was exactly what I needed. By 6, I had everything set up perfectly. Tent secure, fire crackling, and my dehydrated camping meal rehydrating in hot water. I sat on a fallen log I'd dragged over to use as a bench and just listened to the sounds around me. The gentle babble of the creek, birds calling to each other, the whisper of wind through the pines. Complete solitude, perfect silence except for nature itself. I ate my dinner slowly, savoring both the food and the scenery as the sun began to set. The light filtering through the trees created these amazing golden patterns on the forest floor. I remember thinking how perfect everything was in that moment. And then something changed. It started so subtly, I almost didn't notice it. A slight tightness in my chest, like when you've been sitting in one position too long. I shifted on my log, rolled my shoulders, and took a deep breath. But the breath didn't feel complete, like I couldn't quite fill my lungs all the way. I didn't think much of it at first. I was at a higher elevation than I was used to, about 7,000 feet. Probably just needed to acclimate. I took another breath, deeper this time. Same result. It felt like my lungs were hitting a wall before they could fully expand. Still, I wasn't too concerned. I poked at my fire, added another log, and sipped some water. But over the next 15 minutes, the tightness didn't go away. If anything, it was getting worse. I stood up thinking movement might help. That's when I felt the first real pang of worry. The pressure in my chest intensified when I stood, like something was squeezing my ribcage. I tried to take another deep breath and felt resistance, as if something was physically preventing my lungs from expanding. My heart rate picked up a bit, not from exertion, but from the first hints of anxiety. "Just calm down," I said out loud to myself. "You're fine, probably just altitude." But even as I said it, I knew this wasn't normal altitude adjustment. I'd hiked at 14,000 feet before without feeling anything like this. I reached for my water bottle, thinking maybe I was dehydrated, but my hands were suddenly unsteady. Water splashed over my fingers as I raised the bottle to my lips. I drank deeply, hoping it would help, but the water felt strange going down, like my throat was constricting around it. That's when the first real wave of panic hit me. I was 7 miles from my car, with no cell service, and something was very wrong with my breathing. I tried to analyze my symptoms objectively. No pain in my left arm or jaw, so probably not a heart attack. No wheezing or history of asthma. No allergies I knew of. But the pressure kept building, like someone was gradually tightening a belt around my lungs. The previously peaceful forest suddenly felt threatening. The setting sun cast long shadows that seemed to reach for me. The sounds that had been so soothing before, the rustling leaves, the distant calls of animals, now felt ominous, as if the forest itself was watching me struggle. I decided to get into my tent, thinking maybe I just needed to lie down. I crawled inside and zipped it up, but the enclosed space made everything worse. The pressure in my chest intensified, and now I was genuinely struggling to breathe. Each inhale was shallow and unsatisfying, like trying to breathe through a coffee stirrer. My heart was hammering now, pounding so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. The rational part of my brain was still functioning enough to recognize that panic was making everything worse, but I couldn't control it. My vision started to blur around the edges. My hands and feet began to tingle. I fumbled for my phone even though I knew there was no service, just needing to do something, anything. I unzipped the tent with clumsy fingers and practically fell outside. The cooler air hit my face, but it didn't help. I dropped to my knees in the dirt, my fingers digging into the ground as I tried desperately to pull in a full breath. It felt like my lungs had shrunk to half their normal size. Each attempted breath was a battle, and I was losing. The stars were coming out now, spinning in dizzying circles above me as I gasped. I thought, this is it. This is how I die. Alone in the woods, suffocating from nothing. The terror of that thought was indescribable. Not just fear of dying, but of dying alone, helpless, with no understanding of what was happening to me. Time became meaningless. I don't know if I spent minutes or hours on my knees in the dirt. I remember pressing my forehead against the cool ground, focusing every ounce of my concentration on just breathing. In, out, in, out. Each breath a monumental effort. My body was shaking uncontrollably now, from fear, from oxygen deprivation, I don't know. I could feel my pulse in my temples, my neck, my wrists, everywhere, pounding like a drum. The night sounds of the forest faded away, replaced by the rush of blood in my ears and my desperate, ragged attempts to breathe. I started to feel detached from myself, like I was floating slightly above my body, watching myself struggle. That scared me more than anything. I knew dissociation was a bad sign. I tried to focus on something, anything concrete. The rough texture of the dirt under my palms, the smell of the pine needles, the dying embers of my fire still glowing red in the darkness. And then, so gradually I almost didn't notice at first, something changed. One breath went a tiny bit deeper than the ones before, then another. The vice around my chest seemed to loosen, just a fraction. I remained completely still, afraid that any movement might trigger the suffocation again. But slowly, incrementally, my breathing began to normalize. Not all at once. It was like a door that had been sealed shut was creaking open a millimeter at a time. After what felt like forever, I was finally able to take a full breath. The relief was so intense I started crying, just silent tears running down my face as I breathed in and out, savoring each full expansion of my lungs. My body was still trembling, but the acute panic was subsiding. I stayed on the ground for a long time, not trusting my legs to support me. The stars had stopped spinning, and I could hear the creak again, its gentle sound a stark contrast to what I'd just experienced. Eventually, I managed to sit up and lean against a tree. I was exhausted, completely drained, like I'd run a marathon. But I was breathing. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't bring myself to go back in the tent. Instead, I rebuilt my fire and sat beside it until dawn, taking deliberate deep breaths and jumping at every sound in the forest. As soon as there was enough light to see the trail, I packed up camp with shaking hands. Every few minutes, I'd stop and take a deep breath, just to reassure myself that I could. The hike out was brutal. I was physically and emotionally drained, jumping at shadows and constantly monitoring my breathing. It took me nearly twice as long to hike out as it had to hike in. When I finally reached my car, I sat inside with the doors locked for 20 minutes, just breathing and trying to process what had happened. It's been 5 days now, and I still don't know what caused it. I went to the doctor on Monday, and all my tests came back normal. My lungs are clear, my heart is strong, no signs of any allergic reaction. The doctor suggested it might have been a panic attack, but I've never had anxiety issues before, and it came on so suddenly, with no trigger I can identify. I can't stop thinking about those hours when I couldn't breathe, when I was completely helpless, miles from any help. I've always found comfort in solitude, in being alone in nature. Now the thought of being alone in the wilderness fills me with dread. What if it happens again? What if next time my breathing doesn't return to normal? The most terrifying part is that I don't know if this thing, whatever it was, is gone for good, or if it's still inside me, waiting to strike again when I least expect it. Every time my chest feels even slightly tight now, every time I yawn or can't quite get a satisfying breath, the fear comes rushing back. I've spent years seeking out isolation, and now I'm afraid to be alone. I've never felt so betrayed by my own body, so utterly vulnerable. The memory of those hours, fighting for each breath, certain I was dying, haunts me. For the first time in my life, I understand what true helplessness feels like. Story 3. I've been debating whether to share this for weeks now. Part of me feels like writing it all down might help me process what happened, but another part worries that putting it into words makes it more real somehow. I guess I need to tell someone who might understand, because my friends think I'm being dramatic, and the cops aren't telling me everything. This happened about 2 months ago. I live in Oak Ridge, a typical suburban town that sits right up against Blackwood Forest. It's one of those places where people move for the best of both worlds. Cookie-cutter neighborhoods with decent schools, but also quick access to hiking trails and nature. I've been here for about 3 years since I got my job at the tech firm in the next town over. I've always been a night walker. Something about the quiet and solitude helps clear my head, especially after staring at code all day. There's a trail system that starts basically in my backyard. Just hop the fence, walk about 50 yards through a field, and you hit the main path. I've walked these trails hundreds of times in all seasons. I know every bend, every fallen log, every fork in the path. Or at least I thought I did. That night started like any other. It was a Thursday in October, crisp but not cold yet. I finished dinner around 8 and decided to take my usual loop, about 3 miles total. I grabbed my coat, strapped on my headlamp, nothing fancy, just a basic REI one, and headed out. The moon was nearly full, so there was decent ambient light even without my lamp. Perfect conditions. The first mile was completely normal. I passed the old oak with the weird knot that looks like a face, crossed the small wooden bridge over the creek, and was heading into what locals call the deep stretch, a part where the trees get denser and the trail narrows a bit. I remember checking my watch, 8:37. That's when I heard it. Not a scream or anything dramatic like that, just a soft sound like someone stepping on leaves, but with a rhythm that didn't match any animal I know. It came from off-trail, maybe 30 yards to my right, in an area where there shouldn't be any side paths. I stopped and turned my headlamp in that direction, and that's when I saw him, her. It was a small figure, definitely a child, standing, completely still between 2 pine trees. They looked to be maybe 8 or 10 years old, wearing what seemed like dark clothes, though it was hard to make out details at that distance in the darkness. My first thought was, what the hell is a kid doing out here alone at night? I called out, "Hey there, are you okay? The trail's over here." The child didn't respond or move, just stood there watching me. I called out again, thinking maybe they were scared or couldn't hear me properly. Still nothing. That's when my concern outweighed my usual rule of staying on the trail. I mean, it was a child, alone, in the woods, at night. What was I supposed to do? I stepped off the path, pushing through some underbrush, and headed toward the kid. "Don't worry, I'm not going to hurt you. Are you lost?" I was about 15 feet away when the child finally moved, but not toward me. They took several steps backward, still facing me, before stopping again. "It's okay," I said, approaching slowly. "I just want to help you get back to the trail. Where are your parents?" Again the child retreated, keeping the same distance between us. It was odd, not running away in panic, just maintaining distance, like a calculated move. I remember feeling the first hint of unease then, but I pushed it aside. This was a lost kid, probably scared, maybe in shock, so I followed. In hindsight, I can't believe how quickly I abandoned the trail. 5 minutes in, I realized I was in a part of the forest I'd never seen before, despite living here for years. The trees were older, closer together, and the ground was covered in a thick carpet of pine needles that muffled my footsteps. The child stayed just visible enough, always at the edge of where my headlamp could reach. Every time I'd speed up, they'd move faster too. Every time I slowed down, they'd slow down just enough to stay in sight. I started calling out less frequently, focusing more on not losing them in the increasingly dense forest. I'm not sure how long we went on like this, 15 minutes, 20. Time gets weird when you're focused on something like that. But eventually, we reached a small clearing, and that's when I saw it. A shed or cabin or whatever you want to call it. Just a small wooden structure, maybe 10 by 12 feet, with a slanted roof and a single door. It looked ancient and like it was barely standing. The wood was rotting in places, and there was no sign of recent use or habitation. The child moved toward it, circling to the back of the structure, and for the first time, I completely lost sight of them. "Hello," I called out, approaching the shed cautiously. "Are you in there? Let me help you." That's when I heard it. Footsteps. Not the light ones of a child, but heavy, deliberate steps of an adult. Coming from behind the shed, from the direction the child had disappeared. Slow at first, then faster, moving toward the side of the building where they would come into view. In that moment, everything clicked into place with horrifying clarity. There was no lost child. I'd been lured here, away from the trail, away from safety, away from where anyone could hear me. Pure instinct took over. I switched off my headlamp and dropped to a crouch, trying to silence my breathing that suddenly seemed deafening. The footsteps continued, growing closer. I backed away as quietly as possible, trying to remember which direction I'd come from. But in the dark, with adrenaline pumping through me, every direction looked the same. I made a split-second decision and moved toward what seemed like the densest part of the forest, hoping to put as many trees between me and whoever was approaching. I moved as quickly as I dared without making noise, stopping every few seconds to listen. The footsteps had stopped too. Whoever it was, they knew I'd fled. I could feel them listening, just as I was, trying to locate me in the darkness. For what felt like an eternity, I crouched behind a large fallen tree, barely breathing, straining to hear any indication of where they were. The silence was absolute, except for the distant hooting of an owl and the pounding of my heart, which I was certain could be heard for miles. Then I heard a twig snap about 20 yards to my left. They were circling, trying to find me. I stayed frozen, afraid that any movement would give away my position. Another snap, closer this time. They were methodical, patient. I had to move. I chose a direction perpendicular to the sounds and began to creep away, placing each foot with excruciating care. After about 50 yards, I dared to turn my headlamp back on for just a second, long enough to get my bearings, but hopefully not long enough to give away my position. In that brief flash of light, I saw something that chilled me more than the footsteps or the shed or anything else that night. About 30 feet ahead of me, standing perfectly still, was the child, just watching, waiting. I didn't even have time to process what that meant before I extinguished the light and changed direction immediately. I don't know how I found my way back. Some combination of luck, residual moonlight, and pure desperation. I ran when I thought I was far enough away, stumbling over roots and branches, getting whipped in the face by low-hanging limbs I couldn't see. At some point, I hit what I recognized as one of the marked trails. Not the one I'd started on, but one I knew would eventually connect back. I didn't slow down until I reached my backyard fence. I vaulted over it, burst through my back door, and locked every door and window in the house before collapsing on my kitchen floor, shaking uncontrollably. I called 911 once I could speak coherently. The dispatcher kept asking if I was hurt, if I'd been attacked. I tried to explain about the child, the shed, the footsteps, but even as I said it out loud, I could hear how it sounded. Still, they sent officers out. 2 cops showed up about 20 minutes later. They took my statement, asked me if I could lead them back to the shed. I couldn't, not in the dark, not that night. They said they'd check the usual trails and come back in the morning. True to their word, a different officer came by around 10 the next day. I led him as best I could, trying to retrace my steps. We found what I thought was where I'd left the trail, but after an hour of searching, We found nothing. No shed, no clearing, no signs of anyone having been there. The officer was polite but skeptical. Asked if I'd been drinking. I hadn't. Suggested maybe I'd gotten disoriented in the dark, possible, or imagined things due to exhaustion. Insulting. He promised they'd keep an eye on the trail system, but didn't seem too concerned. For 2 weeks, I felt like I was losing my mind. I stopped taking walks altogether. I couldn't sleep without checking the locks multiple times. I started researching missing persons cases in the area, looking for any pattern, any clue about what I'd encountered. Then, about 3 weeks after it happened, I got a call from Detective Harris at the police department. The city was doing some clearing work in the forest, removing unauthorized structures and hazards. They'd found a shed. I met him there that afternoon. It was the same one, I'm certain of it, though approaching it in daylight with a police escort felt surreal. He wouldn't let me get too close because they were processing it as a potential crime scene, but what he did tell me made my blood run cold. They'd found items inside that matched evidence from a kidnapping case from 2 years ago. A 7-year-old girl who'd disappeared from a playground about 15 miles from here. They never found her. Detective Harris wouldn't tell me everything they discovered inside. Said the investigation was ongoing and the details weren't public. But he did thank me. Said if I hadn't reported what happened, they might never have found this place. I asked about the child I saw. Was it possible it was the missing girl? A different victim? He just shook his head. Said there was no evidence anyone had been living in or near the shed recently. That was 6 weeks ago. The police have been back to my house twice for follow-up questions. I've read about the demolition of the shed in our local paper, though the article was vague about what they found. There have been unmarked police cars parked on my street more than once. I still don't go into the forest at night. I'm not sure I ever will again. But sometimes, when I look out my back window after dark, I think I can see a small figure standing at the edge of the trees, just visible in the distance, not moving, just watching, waiting. I don't know if what I saw that night was a real child being used as bait or something else entirely. I don't know who was in those woods with me or how many victims they might have claimed before I stumbled upon their trap. And I don't know why I was able to escape when others apparently weren't. All I know is that something evil lives in those woods, and sometimes I can't shake the feeling that it's not finished with me yet. Story 4. I still get chills thinking about how I discovered the truth. Even typing this makes my hands shake a little. I've never been the superstitious type. I'm actually pretty skeptical about paranormal stuff in general. But what happened to me changed everything I thought I knew about reality. It started back in 10th grade. I was dating Lauren at the time. We'd been together for about 7 months, and things were good between us. Nothing extraordinary, just a normal high school relationship. We hung out after school, went to movies on weekends, the usual stuff. I genuinely liked her. Then Melissa transferred to our school. I still remember the first time I saw her in the hallway. She had this intense way of looking at people, like she could see right through you. We had chemistry class together, and she sat 2 rows in front of me. I noticed her right away, but didn't think much of it. Just a new girl at school. Within 3 days of meeting her, literally just 3 days, I broke up with Lauren. I still can't explain why I did it. It wasn't like I had some big revelation or that Lauren and I were having problems. It just felt like I had to be with Melissa. Like there was this invisible force pulling me toward her. When I think back on it now, it was like I wasn't even in control of my own thoughts. I remember Lauren crying and asking me what she did wrong. I couldn't even give her a real answer. I just said, I think we should see other people. God, that sounds so cliché and awful now. The worst part is I didn't even feel bad about it at the time. All I could think about was Melissa. The next day I asked Melissa out, and she said yes, like she'd been expecting it, like she knew it was going to happen all along. We started dating, and for the first few months, everything seemed normal. We'd go out, hang with friends, do homework together. Normal teenage stuff. But then the nightmares started. I'd never had issues sleeping before, ever. But about 4 months into our relationship, I started having these horrific dreams. Not your standard scary dreams where you're being chased or falling. These were different. In most of them, I was lying in bed, fully aware I was dreaming, but unable to move. There was always this feeling of something watching me from the corner of the room. Sometimes I'd see a dark shape moving toward me, getting closer and closer, until I'd finally manage to wake up gasping for air. I started experiencing sleep paralysis too. If you've never had it, consider yourself lucky. You're awake, but you can't move a single muscle. You're trapped in your own body. And the whole time, there's this overwhelming sense of dread, like something evil is in the room with you. I'd try to scream but couldn't make a sound. Sometimes I'd see shadowy figures standing over me or hear whispers I couldn't quite make out. I didn't tell Melissa about any of this at first. I didn't want to seem weird or crazy. But as the nightmares got worse, I finally mentioned it to her. Her reaction was strange. She didn't seem surprised or particularly concerned. She just said, "Maybe something's trying to tell you something," and changed the subject. Looking back, that should have been a red flag. Around the same time, I started noticing things moving in my peripheral vision. I'd be sitting in class or watching TV, and I'd catch a glimpse of something dark shifting just out of my line of sight. But whenever I'd turn to look directly at it, there would be nothing there. It got to the point where I was constantly glancing over my shoulder, always feeling like someone or something was watching me. My grades started slipping. I was tired all the time from not sleeping well. Friends commented that I seemed different, more withdrawn, but I couldn't break up with Melissa. The thought of not being with her caused me actual physical anxiety. My chest would tighten, and I'd feel dizzy. It was like I was addicted to her. We stayed together for almost 2 years. The whole time I felt like I was living in a fog. Looking back, I can see how isolated I became. I stopped hanging out with my old friends. I spent less time with my family. My whole life revolved around Melissa. Finally, during our senior year, we broke up. I still don't know exactly why or how it happened. One day, it was like whatever hold she had on me just weakened. We had a fight about something trivial, I don't even remember what, and I found myself saying we should take a break. The words came out of my mouth, and I was as surprised as she was. Her eyes got wide, and for a split second, she looked furious. Not sad, not hurt, furious. Then her expression changed to this eerie calmness. "If that's what you want," she said. Her voice was flat, emotionless. After we broke up, the nightmares stopped almost immediately. The sleep paralysis went away. I started feeling like myself again. I chalked it all up to stress and the emotional toll of a difficult relationship. I went to college, moved on with my life, and tried not to think about that dark period too much. Years passed. I was 24, working at a marketing firm in the same town I grew up in. I had my own apartment, a decent job, a normal life. Then my sister Katie called me one night, sounding really agitated. "Adam, you're not going to believe who I'm living with," she said. It turned out Katie had answered an ad for a roommate, and ended up moving in with none other than Melissa. The world works in weird ways sometimes. Katie knew we had dated in high school, but didn't know any of the strange stuff I'd experienced. I never told my family about the nightmares or the sleep paralysis. It seemed too personal, too weird. "She seems nice enough," Katie said, "but there's something off about this house." Over the next few weeks, Katie called me regularly with stories about weird things happening in the apartment. She'd hear footsteps in the hallway when no one was there. Sometimes she'd wake up in the middle of the night feeling like someone was standing at the foot of her bed. Once, she was alone in the kitchen when all the cabinet doors flew open at once. "I know it sounds crazy," she said during one late-night call, "but I swear I'm not making this up." I believed her because it sounded all too familiar. Then Katie told me something that made my blood run cold. She'd overheard Melissa talking to her mother on the phone about the rituals and how they needed to be done correctly. Katie thought they were talking about some kind of religious practice, but something about it unsettled her. A few days later, Katie called me in a panic. "Adam, you need to come over right now. Melissa's gone for the weekend, and I found something you need to see." I drove to their apartment, feeling a growing sense of dread with each mile. When I got there, Katie looked pale and shaken. "Her whole family practices brujeria," she said as soon as I walked in. "Black magic. They all know about it. Her mom, her grandma, her aunts, they're all into it." My first reaction was disbelief. It sounded ridiculous, like something out of a horror movie. But then Katie took me to Melissa's room. She'd been cleaning and accidentally knocked over a box from the top shelf of Melissa's closet. Inside were books on brujeria, small cloth dolls, vials of what looked like dried herbs and blood, and various other items I couldn't identify. "That's not even the worst part," Katie said, leading me to a small door in Melissa's closet that opened into a crawl space. Inside the crawl space was a makeshift altar with candles, strange symbols drawn in what looked like charcoal, and photographs. My photograph was there from when I was 17, and next to it was a candle with my name carved into it. A knife was stabbed into the wall directly above it. I felt sick, physically, violently sick. I stumbled out of the room and barely made it to the bathroom before throwing up. When I could finally speak, Katie told me more. She'd confronted Melissa's cousin about it, and the cousin had confirmed everything. Melissa had cast a love spell on me back in high school. She'd wanted me, decided I was going to be hers, and used brujeria to make it happen. The cousin said Melissa had bragged about how quickly it had worked, how I'd broken up with Lauren almost immediately. "She said Melissa was always good at it," Katie told me, her voice shaking, "that their grandmother had taught her since she was little. It was like someone had turned a key in my mind, and suddenly everything made sense. The inexplicable attraction I'd felt toward her, the nightmares, the sleep paralysis, the shadows in my peripheral vision. It hadn't been stress or coincidence or my imagination. It had been her influence, her magic, whatever you want to call it, working on me." That night, after leaving Katie's, I had the worst nightmare yet. I woke up around 3 in the morning with that familiar feeling of being watched. I couldn't move, classic sleep paralysis. But this time, when I managed to turn my head toward my living room, I saw it, a massive black mass sitting on my couch. It wasn't human-shaped, more like a dense shadow that absorbed all the light around it. And it was watching me. I could feel its attention like a physical weight. I tried to scream but couldn't. I tried to move but was frozen. All I could do was lie there, staring at this thing, feeling its hatred and anger directed at me. When I finally broke free of the paralysis, the mass was gone, but the feeling of dread remained. The next day, I told Katie she needed to move out immediately. She was already packing when I called. She stayed with me for a few weeks until she found a new place. During that time, we both experienced strange phenomena in my apartment. Knocking sounds from inside the walls, the feeling of something brushing against our legs in the dark. Objects would disappear and reappear in different places. One night, a glass flew off my kitchen counter and shattered against the wall. No one was near it. It's been 2 years since then. The nightmares have mostly stopped, though I still have them occasionally. The sense of being watched has faded, but I'm left with this knowledge that there are things in this world that most people don't acknowledge or understand. I later found out from mutual friends that Melissa had tried the same thing with other guys after me. Some were affected, some weren't. I don't know why it worked so strongly on me. Maybe I was just more susceptible somehow. What scares me most isn't what happened. It's the idea that I had no control. For almost 2 years of my life, my thoughts and feelings weren't entirely my own. I made decisions that weren't really mine to make. And I never would have known if my sister hadn't accidentally discovered the truth. I still live in the same town. Sometimes I see Melissa around. She works at a local store now. She always smiles when she sees me, like we share some private joke. I avoid her as much as possible. I don't expect everyone to believe my story. Before it happened to me, I wouldn't have believed it either. But I know what I experienced. I know what was done to me. And I know now that there are dark things in this world that most of us never see until they decide to show themselves. Story 5. I still get goosebumps thinking about what happened last summer. My family's annual hiking trip was something I used to look forward to all year. But now, I'm not sure I ever want to go back to those mountains again. Let me start by saying I've never been the type to believe in supernatural stuff. Ghost stories were just that, stories. My dad's a high school science teacher, my mom works in accounting, and they raised me and my little brother Jake to look for logical explanations. We're not superstitious people. At least, we weren't before. So last July, we headed to the Appalachian foothills for our 4-day trip. It was me, Emma, 14, my parents, Jake, 11, and our family friends, the Millers, Tom and Diane and their son, Matt, who's my age. We'd rented this rustic cabin that was pretty nice. Nothing fancy, but it had running water and electricity, which is all you really need. The first 3 days were awesome. We hiked the popular trails, took tons of pictures, spotted deer, and even a black bear from a safe distance. Normal vacation stuff. On the 4th day, our last full day, Dad suggested we try something different. He'd been talking to the guy who owned our cabin, and the owner mentioned this hidden gem of a trail that wasn't on the tourist maps. Dad was all excited about it, going on about unspoiled nature and how we'd have the whole place to ourselves. I remember the trailhead didn't even have a proper sign, just a faded wooden post with some peeling paint. The path was obviously not maintained like the others, narrower, with branches reaching across in places and thick undergrowth on both sides. It was beautiful, though, in a wild sort of way. The sunlight filtered through the dense canopy, creating these dappled patterns on the ground. Jake was running ahead, trying to catch butterflies, while the adults were chatting and pointing out interesting plants. About 30 minutes in, everything changed for me. It started with this feeling in my chest, like someone was slowly tightening a belt around my ribs. At first, I thought maybe I was getting tired or having some kind of asthma attack, which was weird because I don't have asthma. But this wasn't physical. It was more like dread, pure, unexplainable dread washing over me. Then I heard it, the singing. It was so faint at first that I wasn't even sure it was real. A woman's voice singing or maybe humming something in a language I'd never heard before. The melody was, I don't know how to describe it. It was beautiful in this strange, uncomfortable way, like when you hear a really sad song that gives you chills. Except this was worse, much worse. "Dad," I said, tugging on his sleeve, "do you hear that?" He looked down at me, squinting in the dappled light. "Hear what, Em?" "That's singing. Someone's singing." He stopped for a second, tilted his head. Probably just the wind in the trees, or maybe a hiker on another trail. But it wasn't the wind, and it wasn't coming from another trail. It was all around us, like it was seeping from the ground and the trees themselves. I looked at the others. No one seemed bothered. Matt was showing Jake something on his phone. Mom and Diane were picking some kind of berries to identify later. Tom was checking the trail map. Normal stuff. But the singing was getting louder in my ears, and that feeling of dread was getting worse. I tried to ignore it, told myself I was being stupid. Maybe I'd read too many creepy stories online or something. But with every step deeper into the woods, the voice grew clearer, the melody more complex, more beautiful, more terrifying. About an hour into the hike, Dad called for a water break. We found a small clearing with some fallen logs to sit on. I couldn't drink. My throat felt too tight. The singing was so loud now I couldn't understand how nobody else heard it. And then, everything went silent. Not just the singing, everything. The birds stopped chirping, the insects stopped buzzing. The breeze that had been rustling the leaves all day just died. It was like someone had hit a mute button on the entire forest. I noticed everyone had stopped moving. Dad was mid-sip with his water bottle, frozen with it against his lips. Mom's hand was suspended in the air, reaching for something in her backpack. They weren't looking at each other or at me. They were all staring in the same direction, into the woods to our left. I turned to look too, not wanting to, but unable to stop myself. There she was, standing just beyond the tree line, about 30 feet away. An old woman, so old she barely looked human anymore. Her robe, I guess that's what you'd call it, might have been white once, but now it was this yellowish-gray color, torn in places and caked with what looked like mud, or maybe blood in others. Her hair was a mess of tangled white strands with leaves and twigs stuck in it, hanging down past her waist. But her face, God, her face. Her skin hung from her bones like it was too big for her, sagging around her jaw and neck. Her eyes were what got to me, though. They were wide open, unblinking, and so dark they looked like empty holes, and they weren't focused on us exactly. It was like she was looking through us, at something behind or beyond us. I couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't even breathe. None of us could. We just stood there, locked in place, staring at her as she stared through us. Then, without any warning, she was gone. Not like she walked away or turned around. She was just there one second and not there the next, like someone had erased her from existence. The instant she vanished, sound rushed back into the world. Birds, insects, wind, all at once. The pressure lifted from my chest so suddenly I almost fell over. I gasped for air, realizing I'd been holding my breath. Dad lowered his water bottle. Mom's hand completed its movement to her backpack, but nobody said anything about what we'd just seen. Not one word. Then Dad cleared his throat and said, "I think we should head back." Nobody argued. We packed up our stuff in record time and started walking, fast, back the way we'd come. With each step, We seemed to walk a little faster until we were practically jogging. Jake was crying, though he wouldn't say why. Matt looked pale and kept looking over his shoulder. The adults were tight-lipped, their eyes darting around nervously. I kept waiting for the singing to start again, but it didn't. The forest was normal now, too normal, like it was trying too hard to convince us nothing had happened. When we got back to the cabin, everyone immediately started packing, even though we weren't supposed to leave until the next morning. Dad made some excuse about beating the traffic, and within an hour, we were in our cars heading home. In the car, I finally worked up the courage to ask, "Dad, that woman in the woods, who was she?" He gripped the steering wheel tighter, knuckles turning white. "What woman, Emma? There wasn't any woman." Mom turned around from the front seat, her face serious. "Let's not talk about the hike anymore, okay? It wasn't a good trail. We won't go back there." But I saw her face when she said it. The fear in her eyes. She saw what I saw. They all did. It's been almost a year now, and we've never spoken about it again. The Millers came over for dinner a few times, but nobody ever brings up the trip. It's like we all made this silent agreement to pretend it never happened. I've tried researching local legends about the area. There are stories about witches in the Appalachian Mountains, old folk tales from settlers, and even older ones from indigenous tribes. Some talk about an ancient woman who lures people off trails, or a spirit that appears to hikers who stray from the path. But nothing exactly matches what we saw. Sometimes I still hear that melody in my dreams. I wake up covered in sweat, the echo of that inhuman voice fading as I open my eyes. I've started sleeping with music playing to keep the silence away. I don't know what we encountered that day. A ghost, a witch, some kind of hallucination caused by something in the air or water. But I know what I saw, what we all saw, and I know the terror I felt was real. The worst part is not knowing why she appeared to us. Was she warning us? Threatening us? Was she trying to tell us something? Or were we just in the wrong place at the wrong time, accidentally crossing paths with something not meant for human eyes? I used to think the world made sense, that everything had a logical explanation. Now I'm not so sure. There are places in those mountains where reality seems thinner somehow, where things can slip through from somewhere else. And I think we stumbled into one of those places. We're going on vacation to the beach this summer. Dad says we need a change of scenery. Nobody has suggested hiking. I don't think we ever will again. Sometimes when I'm alone in the woods behind our house, I catch myself listening for that singing. Part of me is terrified I'll hear it again. But another part, a part I don't like to acknowledge, is almost hoping I will. Because then at least I'd know it was real, that I'm not crazy, that we all experienced the same impossible thing. But the forest stays silent. And I'm left wondering if that's better or worse. Story 6. I still can't sleep with my balcony door unlocked. It's been 8 months since that night, but every creak I hear in my apartment sends my heart racing. I've tried talking to friends about it, but they don't get how something like this changes you, how it makes you question everything about your sense of safety. I've lived in this old apartment building in São Paulo for about 3 years now. It's nothing special, just a second-floor unit in a building that's seen better days. The paint peels in the hallways, the elevator works maybe half the time, and the pipes make this horrible clanging noise every morning around 5. But the rent was cheap, and that's all that mattered to me back then. That Wednesday started like any other day. I remember it was particularly hot, and the air conditioning at the office was broken. My boss let everyone go home early, around 6 instead of our usual 8. I was actually happy about it for once. I stopped at the corner store, grabbed a microwave meal, lasagna, the cheap kind with barely any cheese, and headed back to my place. I got home around 6:30, heated up my sad dinner, and flipped on the TV to watch whatever soccer match was on. I wasn't really paying attention. I was exhausted from a project I'd been working on all week, and the heat had drained whatever energy I had left. After about an hour, my eyes kept closing on their own. I remember checking my phone. It was only 7:45, but I decided to just call it a night. I turned off the TV, locked the front door. I always double-check this, but completely forgot about the balcony door. I never leave it open, but that night I had stepped out there to check if my neighbor's music was coming from their balcony. Guess I left it unlocked when I came back in. I fell asleep almost instantly. I don't remember dreaming, just darkness, until something woke me up. At first I thought it was just the building settling. This place makes noises all the time. The walls creak when it's windy, the pipes knock, the floorboards groan. You get used to it. But this was different. This was rhythmic, deliberate, like footsteps, but trying not to sound like footsteps. Creak, pause, creak, pause. I checked my phone. 2:27 in the morning. Way too late for maintenance or neighbors to be making that kind of noise. I sat up in bed, trying to figure out where it was coming from. Inside my apartment, not above or below. Inside. My mouth went dry. My heart started hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. I live alone. There shouldn't be any sounds like that inside my apartment. The creaking stopped for maybe 30 seconds. Then it started again, but closer now, coming from my living room toward the hallway that leads to my bedroom. I slid out of bed as quietly as I could. My bedroom door was halfway open. I always sleep with it like that because the air circulation is terrible otherwise. I crept toward it, trying to control my breathing, which felt impossible because my chest was so tight I could barely get any air. I reached the door and peered through the gap into the dark hallway. My apartment isn't big, just a bedroom, bathroom, small kitchen, and living room. From my bedroom door, there's a straight shot down a short hallway to the front door, with the kitchen opening on the left and the living room on the right at the end. The creaking was coming from the left side, the kitchen. It was getting louder, closer, and then I saw him. A figure appeared at the end of the hallway, just standing there. A man, not very tall, wearing dark clothes. I couldn't see his face clearly in the darkness, but I could tell he was looking straight ahead, not in my direction. I froze, completely. I don't think I was even breathing. My brain was screaming at me to move, to slam the door, to call for help, but my body wouldn't respond. I just stood there, watching this stranger in my home. He started moving again, slowly, deliberately, still not looking my way. The floor creaked under his weight as he moved into the kitchen. I heard the soft sound of cabinet doors opening and closing. The refrigerator door made that sucking noise it always makes when it opens. He was looking for something, or pretending to look for something. I finally managed to move. I backed away from the door, terrified that if I tried to close it, the noise would alert him. I moved to the corner of my room furthest from the door, my back against the wall. I could still hear him moving around my kitchen. Then the creaking moved again. He was coming toward the hallway. I held my breath. His shadow passed by my door but didn't stop. He didn't look in. He just continued into the living room. Then I heard the unmistakable sound of someone sitting down in my chair. My chair. The fake leather one that makes that specific sound when weight settles into it. He was sitting in my living room like he belonged there. I was shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone when I finally remembered I had it. I couldn't call. He would hear me talking. So I texted the police. My fingers kept hitting the wrong letters. I had to delete and retype multiple times. Someone is in my apartment. Please help. They broke in. I'm hiding in the bedroom. Please send someone quietly. I included my address and apartment number. Then I waited. The longest wait of my life. Minutes passed. 5, 10. I lost track. All I knew was that he was still there. Occasionally I'd hear movement, the sound of him getting up, walking a few steps, sitting back down. Once I heard what sounded like pages turning. Was he reading something? One of my magazines? My phone vibrated. The police. Officers at your building entrance. Need access. Can you come to door? I nearly threw up. They wanted me to go to the door, past him? But what choice did I have? They couldn't get in otherwise. The building's front entrance was locked at night. I took a deep breath. I had to do this. I had to run past him, unlock the door, and pray he didn't catch me before the police got up the stairs. I counted in my head. 1, 2, 3. I bolted. I ran straight down the hallway as fast as I could. I caught a glimpse of him jumping up from my chair, but I didn't stop. I reached the front door, fumbled with the lock, yanked it open, and practically fell into the hallway screaming, "Help! Police! Here!" I heard footsteps pounding up the stairs. 2 officers appeared, guns drawn. They pushed past me into my apartment, while a third stayed with me in the hallway. I was hyperventilating, pointing wildly, trying to explain. They found him trying to hide on my balcony. He had nowhere to go. My apartment is on the 2nd floor, and while he had apparently climbed up somehow, jumping down wasn't really an option. They handcuffed him and brought him out through the hallway. I got a good look at him then. He was younger than I expected, maybe 30, average looking. Nothing remarkable about him at all. He could have been anyone you'd pass on the street without a second glance. That's what terrifies me the most. The police searched him but found nothing. No weapon, no bag for stealing things, no tools for breaking in. Just his wallet and phone. They asked me if anything was missing or damaged. Nothing was. He hadn't taken anything. He hadn't even moved things around much from what I could tell. When they questioned him, he claimed he was just looking for stuff to steal. But it made no sense. Who breaks into an apartment without bringing anything to carry stolen items? Who sits in the victim's chair and reads magazines? The police told me later that he had somehow climbed up the side of the building using the drainage pipe and some ledges, then entered through my unlocked balcony door. But they also seemed confused by his behavior. If he was there to steal, why was he just sitting around? Why didn't he grab anything valuable and leave? The worst part was when one of the officers asked me about my routine. I explained that I usually get home around 8, not 6:30, that I'm never home that early on weekdays. The officer looked at his partner with this look I'll never forget. Then he asked, "So you think he might have known your schedule, that you weren't supposed to be home yet?" That's when it hit me. What if he wasn't there to steal at all? What if he was waiting for me? What if I hadn't come home early that day? Would I have walked in on him? Or worse, would he have been waiting when I went to sleep? I moved apartments the next month. I couldn't stay there knowing someone had violated my space like that. But I still check my balcony door 3 times before bed. I still wake up at the slightest noise. I still wonder what his real plan was that night. And I still wonder if he's doing the same thing to someone else right now. Story 7. I've been wanting to share this story for a long time, but every time I sit down to type it out, my hands start shaking. It's been 3 years since it happened, and I still wake up in the middle of the night sometimes, heart racing, convinced I can hear that damn drumming again. Let me start by saying I'm not some amateur outdoorsman. I've been hiking the Blue Ridge Mountains since I was 12 years old. I know what bears sound like at night. I can identify most bird calls, animal tracks, and I've encountered my fair share of unexpected situations in the backcountry. Nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing, prepared me for what happened that night in October of 2020. My buddy Derek and I had planned this trip for months. We both work high-stress tech jobs, so the idea was to completely disconnect. No phones, no watches, no tech whatsoever, for a full week. Just us, our gear, and the mountains. Derek's always been the more cautious one, meticulously planning our routes and checking weather patterns. I'm more of a, let's see where the trail takes us kind of guy. I guess that's why we balance each other out so well on these trips. We'd been hiking for 3 days, following a remote trail that branched off the main system. The weather had been perfect, crisp autumn air, not too cold at night, and the leaves were at peak color. That afternoon, we came across this small clearing with a pond that wasn't on any of our maps. The water was perfectly still, reflecting the surrounding trees like a mirror. It was gorgeous, exactly the kind of spot you hope to find when you venture off the beaten path. "This is it," I told Derek. "This is where we're camping tonight." We set up our tent about 20 yards from the edge of the pond, collected firewood before sunset, and cooked a simple dinner of dehydrated chili. As the sun disappeared behind the mountains, the temperature dropped quickly. Derek, exhausted from carrying the heavier pack that day, crawled into his sleeping bag right after we cleaned up dinner. "Wake me if anything exciting happens," he mumbled before passing out almost instantly. I stayed up a bit longer, enjoying the stillness. The moon was nearly full, casting enough light that I could see the outline of the pond and the dark mass of trees surrounding our clearing. I doused our campfire until only a few embers remained glowing, then finally crawled into the tent myself. I don't know how long I was asleep before the sound woke me. At first I thought it was Derek shifting in his sleeping bag, but then I realized it was coming from outside. A dull, rhythmic thumping. Not like an animal moving through the underbrush, but deliberate. Thump, 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 thump. Then silence. Then again, thump, 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 thump. It reminded me of a child playing with a drum for the first time. No real pattern, just experimental beats with long pauses in between. I nudged Derek, but he just grunted and rolled over. The guy could sleep through anything. The sound continued, and something about it made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It wasn't loud, but in the complete silence of the wilderness, it might as well have been a gunshot. I unzipped my sleeping bag and grabbed our machete from where I'd stashed it near the tent door. I always bring it for clearing brush or cutting firewood, never for protection. That night, I was glad to have it in my hand. When I unzipped the tent, the cold air hit me immediately. The clearing was bathed in moonlight, and for a second, everything looked normal. Then I noticed something across the pond, a faint orange glow that definitely wasn't there when we went to sleep. The drumming continued, a bit louder now that I was outside. Thump, 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 thump. I stood completely still, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. As my eyes adjusted, I could make out a figure moving near the orange glow. Someone was there, across the pond, tending to what looked like a small fire, and hanging above that fire was what appeared to be a black pot or kettle. My first thought was that another hiker had set up camp on the opposite side of the pond, though we hadn't seen any signs of other people for days. But something felt wrong. The movements were too deliberate, too ancient, if that makes any sense. I took a few steps closer to the pond's edge, machete gripped tightly in my right hand. That's when the figure straightened up and turned toward me. It was an old woman. No, not just old, ancient. Her face was so deeply lined it barely looked human. Her hair hung in long, matted gray strands down to her waist. She wore what looked like layers of tattered clothing, not modern hiking gear, but something that belonged in a history museum. Rags wrapped around her skeletal frame, held together with twine and what looked like animal sinew. But it was her eyes that froze me in place. Even from across the pond, I could see them, clearly. They reflected the firelight like a cat's eyes might, but they were completely black. Not dark brown, not hidden in shadow, pitch black, like holes cut into her face. The drumming stopped abruptly. In the sudden silence, I could hear my own heart pounding in my ears. The old woman stared directly at me. I couldn't move. It wasn't just fear, though there was plenty of that. It was like my muscles had locked up completely. I stood there, machete half raised, unable to even call out to Derek. Then the drumming started again, faster this time, much faster. But I couldn't see anyone else there, just the old woman still staring at me, not moving her hands. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The fire beside her suddenly flared up, the flames shooting 6 or 7 feet into the air. The light illuminated her fully, and that's when I noticed the darkness around her wasn't just the night. It was something else. A kind of shadow that moved independently of the firelight, curling around her like smoke, but thicker, more substantial. I wanted to run back to the tent. I wanted to grab Derek and get the hell out of there, but I couldn't move an inch. Then, as suddenly as it had started, the drumming stopped. The fire went out as if someone had thrown a blanket over it. 1 second the old woman was there, staring at me with those terrible black eyes, and the next, nothing. Complete darkness on the other side of the pond. No fire, no kettle, no woman. Nothing but the dark outline of trees against the night sky. Whatever force had been holding me in place released its grip, and I nearly collapsed. My legs were shaking so badly I could barely walk back to our campsite. I built our fire back up as big as I dared, using almost all our remaining firewood. There was no way in hell I was going back to sleep. I sat there, machete across my lap, staring at the spot across the pond where I'd seen her. The rest of the night was completely silent. No owls, no rustling leaves, no small animals moving through the underbrush. Just absolute stillness until the first gray light of dawn began to appear. When Derek finally woke up, I was still sitting by the fire, wide awake and probably looking like I'd seen a ghost, which honestly might have been preferable to whatever I'd actually witnessed. "Dude, you look like shit," were his first words to me. "Did you sleep at all?" I tried to explain what had happened, but the words sounded insane even to my own ears. Derek listened, concern growing on his face. Not because he believed me, I could tell, but because he was worried about my mental state. "Look, maybe we should head back today," he suggested carefully. "We've been pushing pretty hard, and sometimes the isolation can mess with your head." I didn't argue. We packed up in record time, not even bothering with breakfast beyond a couple of energy bars. As we were breaking down the tent, I kept looking across the pond. In daylight, there was no sign anyone had been there. No fire pit, no footprints, nothing. We hiked for almost 10 hours straight that day, barely speaking. Derek clearly thought I was having some kind of stress-induced hallucination, and I was starting to wonder if he was right. But every time I closed my eyes, I could see those black, endless eyes staring back at me. We reached our car by late afternoon and drove straight to the nearest town, a small place called Raven's Gap. There was only one hotel, a family-run place that had seen better days, and a bar attached to it that served food. After showering and changing, we headed down to get something to eat. The bar was mostly empty, just a couple of locals nursing beers at the counter. The bartender, an older guy with a gray beard and calloused hands, took our food order and poured us each a beer. "You boys been hiking?" he asked, noticing our still damp hair and the exhaustion that must have been written all over our faces. Derek nodded. 3 days out, 1 day, back in a hurry, he said, giving me a sideways glance. I don't know what made me do it. Maybe the need for validation, maybe just the beer hitting my empty stomach, but I found myself telling the bartender what I'd seen by the pond. As I spoke, the bar got quieter. The few locals who had been chatting among themselves fell silent, listening to my story. When I finished, the bartender was staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. He exchanged glances with one of the older men at the bar, who nodded slightly. "That pond," the bartender said finally. "Was it shaped kind of like a crescent moon? Trees growing right up to the edge except for that clearing?" My stomach dropped. "Yeah, exactly like that." The old man at the bar turned on his stool to face us. "You boys camped on which ground?" he said, his voice matter of fact. "That's Eliza Coffin's territory. Has been for 200 years, give or take." Derek laughed nervously. "Come on, man." But the old man wasn't smiling. "Folks around here don't go near that pond, not for any reason. Those who do don't always come back. The ones that do," he looked at me appraisingly, "well, they usually see something they wish they hadn't." "You're lucky," the bartender added, pushing our beers closer to us. "Most hikers who camp there, if they see her, they don't make it out. Something about you staying awake all night might have saved both your lives." Derek was shaking his head, clearly thinking these locals were having fun at our expense. But I knew better. I'd seen those eyes, felt that unnatural stillness in the air. "The drumming," I said quietly. "What's that about?" The old man and the bartender exchanged another look. "That's how she calls her friends," the bartender said carefully. "The drumming isn't her. It's whatever comes before she appears." We didn't stay at the bar much longer after that. Derek was convinced it was all an elaborate joke at our expense, some mess with the tourists routine they pulled on every out-of-towner who came through. Maybe he's right. God, I hope he's right. But I know what I saw. I know what I felt standing by that pond, paralyzed under the gaze of something ancient and malevolent. And I know that I'll never hike without my gun again, even on the most well-traveled trails. Because sometimes, when it's very quiet at night, I swear I can still hear it, that primitive, childlike drumming coming from somewhere in the darkness just beyond my window. Thump, 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 thump. Story 8. I'm 55 years old now, but I can still hear that laugh sometimes when I'm trying to fall asleep. It's been 40 years, but the memory hasn't faded at all, not even a little bit. I've never told many people about what happened that day when I was 15, mostly because I don't want to be labeled as that crazy guy or have people think I'm making stuff up for attention. But I need to get this off my chest, and maybe some of you have experienced something similar. Growing up, I was raised in a Christian household in a small town in Michigan. We went to church every Sunday, and I believed in God and Jesus and all that. But I never bought into the whole ghosts and demons walking among us thing. My mom would sometimes talk about spirits and the devil's influence, but I always thought that was just metaphorical or something people said to scare kids into behaving. I was the skeptical type, even as a teenager. I needed proof before I believed in anything supernatural. Our house was a pretty standard two-story from the 1960s with a finished basement. Nothing fancy or old or creepy about it. Just a normal suburban home on a quiet street with neighbors we'd known for years. But that basement, I always had this weird feeling about it. Nothing I could explain rationally, just a sense of unease when I went down there alone. I'd always hurry to get whatever I needed and come back up as quickly as possible. My bedroom was on the first floor, right above the furnace room, with a heating vent in the floor that connected to the basement. It was a Saturday in October, and my parents had gone to some fundraiser at church. My older brother was at a friend's house, so I had the place to myself for the afternoon. I was just hanging out in my room, reading some car magazine, and thinking about how I'd customize my own car when I eventually got one. It was around 3 in the afternoon, still bright outside, completely ordinary. That's when I heard it. At first, I thought it was just the furnace kicking on. It made these weird groaning sounds sometimes when it started up. But this was different. It started as a low rumble, almost below the threshold of hearing, but it made the hairs on my arms stand up. Then it got louder, and I realized it was coming through the heating vent in my floor. It was a laugh, not a human laugh, not even close. This laugh was deep, like impossibly deep, the kind of bass you feel more than hear. It was grating, like metal scraping against metal, but somehow formed into a sound of amusement. I don't know how else to describe it except to say it was evil, pure evil. The sound had a quality to it that just felt wrong, like it shouldn't exist in our world. I froze completely. I was sitting on my bed, and I just stopped breathing for what felt like forever. The magazine slipped from my hands and fell to the floor, but I didn't move to pick it up. I was terrified that if I moved or acknowledged the sound in any way, whatever was making it would know I could hear it and would come for me. The laugh rose up through the vent, getting louder and more intense. It had this weird cadence to it. Ha, ha, ha. Slow and deliberate, like whoever or whatever was laughing was really enjoying itself. Then it changed to a higher pitch, almost mocking, before dropping back down to that impossible bass. It lasted, maybe 30 seconds total, but it felt like hours. Then it just stopped. The silence afterward was almost as terrifying as the laugh itself. I sat there, completely still, waiting to see if it would start again or if something would come crawling out of the vent. Nothing did. After about 10 minutes of absolute stillness, I finally worked up the courage to move. I didn't go check the basement. No way in hell was I going down there. Instead, I grabbed my portable radio, cranked it up as loud as it would go, and sat with my back against the wall opposite the vent until my parents came home 3 hours later. I didn't tell them what happened. I tried to convince myself that it was just some weird acoustic phenomenon, maybe a neighbor's machinery or something being distorted as it traveled through the heating ducts. But I knew better. That laugh wasn't human, and it wasn't mechanical. It was something else entirely. After that day, I refused to be alone in the house. If my family was going out, I made sure I had somewhere else to be. I started locking my bedroom door at night, and I put a heavy box over the heating vent, claiming I was cold and didn't want drafts. My mom thought it was weird, but she didn't push it. The basement became completely off limits for me unless someone else was down there too. When I absolutely had to go down, like when my mom sent me to get something from the freezer, I developed this habit of singing loudly the entire time. I don't know why, but I had this idea that if I was making noise, the thing with the laugh couldn't get me. like it could only attack in silence or something. I'd belt out whatever song was popular at the time, not caring how stupid I sounded. My brother made fun of me mercilessly for it, but I didn't care. Being embarrassed was better than being terrified. For months afterward, I had trouble sleeping. I'd lie awake listening for that laugh, jumping at every creak and groan the house made. I started sleeping with a baseball bat beside my bed. I'm not sure what good I thought it would do against whatever had made that sound, but it made me feel a little safer. The worst part was that I couldn't explain it. I was raised to believe that there were rational explanations for everything, that ghosts and demons weren't real. But what I heard that day defied any rational explanation I could come up with. It wasn't human, it wasn't mechanical, and it wasn't my imagination. It was real, and it was malevolent. My fear eventually started to fade, not because I forgot about it, but because nothing else happened. No more laughs, no other strange occurrences. Just that one 30-second episode that completely changed how I viewed the world. After about a year, I started to get angry about it. This thing, whatever it was, had taken away my sense of safety in my own home. It had made me live in fear for months. And for what? It hadn't actually harmed me. It had just scared the absolute hell out of me and then disappeared. The anger helped me cope, I think. It gave me back some sense of control. I started going down to the basement alone again, though I still sang sometimes just in case. I took the box off the heating vent. I stopped jumping at every noise the house made. But I never forgot that laugh, and I never stopped believing that there was something down there that day, something that wasn't supposed to exist in our world. When I was 17, my brother and I got into this massive fight. I don't even remember what it was about now, probably something stupid and teenage. But I remember how it ended. He was chasing me through the house, threatening to beat me up, and I ran down to the basement. Not just to the main area, but all the way to the furnace room, the darkest, creepiest part of the whole basement. I hid behind the furnace itself, in this tiny space between it and the wall. My brother came down the stairs, still yelling threats, but he stopped at the bottom. He wouldn't come into the furnace room. He was too scared of it, always had been. I realized then that I wasn't afraid anymore, at least not enough for it to control me. I sat there in the dark, pressed against the wall behind the furnace, and I felt something like triumph. Whatever had been down there that day hadn't won. It had scared me, yes, but it hadn't broken me. I'm still a Christian, but my faith has evolved. I believe now that there are things in this world that we can't explain, forces of evil that sometimes intersect with our lives in ways we don't understand. I don't think that laugh was just in my head or some weird acoustic trick. I think something was there that day, something that wanted to frighten me, to make me feel powerless and alone. But here's what I've learned in the 40 years since that day. Fear is the real enemy. That thing, whatever it was, didn't hurt me physically. It couldn't. All it could do was make me afraid, and through that fear, it controlled me for months. Once I understood that, I took back control of my life. I've owned 3 houses since moving out of my parents' place, and I've never had another experience like that one. Sometimes I wonder if it was tied to that specific house, or if it was just a random encounter with something from beyond our understanding. I've researched similar experiences over the years, and I know I'm not alone in having heard inexplicable sounds or felt presences that shouldn't be there. The memory is still crystal clear. The way the laugh seemed to rise up through the vent like thick smoke. The way it made the air in my room feel heavy and cold. The absolute certainty I felt that if I moved or spoke, something terrible would happen. The primal fear that gripped me, not the kind of fear you feel watching a horror movie, but the bone-deep terror of a prey animal that knows the predator is near. I still sometimes wake up in the middle of the night thinking I've heard that laugh again. My wife says I talk in my sleep, sometimes begging someone or something to go away. I never remember the dreams, but I know what they're about. If you're reading this and you've experienced something similar, know that you're not crazy. These things happen, and they're terrifying when they do. But also know that fear is the greatest weapon these entities have. They feed on it, use it to control us. When we refuse to be afraid, they lose their power over us. That day when I was 15 changed me forever. It opened my eyes to a reality I didn't want to accept, that there are things in this world, or perhaps from beyond it, that we can't explain and shouldn't try to understand. But it also taught me that even in the face of inexplicable evil, we have a strength within us that can overcome the fear. I still don't know what made that laugh, or why it chose our basement, or why it never came back. But I do know that for one brief moment on an ordinary Saturday afternoon 40 years ago, something impossible happened, and it echoes through my life to this day. Story 9. I've been debating whether to post this for weeks. I'm not sure if writing it down will help or just make everything worse. But I need to tell someone who might understand, because my friends think I'm losing it, and my family, well, they're part of the problem. This all started about 2 months ago. I live in Willow Creek, one of those neighborhoods where everyone has the same beige houses and perfectly trimmed lawns. Nothing exciting ever happens here, or at least that's what I thought until my Uncle Ramon showed up. Uncle Ramon isn't like the rest of my family. My parents are pretty normal. Dad works in insurance, Mom teaches elementary school. But Ramon is different. He's my dad's older brother, and he's heavily involved in Santeria. I don't know much about it, just that it's this religion that mixes Catholic saints with African beliefs. My dad doesn't talk about it much, and whenever Ramon visits, there's always this weird tension. Anyway, Ramon showed up unexpectedly on a Friday evening. I was in my room playing video games when I heard voices in the backyard. I looked out my window and saw my uncle with 2 other men I'd never seen before. They were wearing all white clothing, like these loose shirts and pants. They had these colorful beaded necklaces too. Even from my window, I could tell something serious was going down. My parents weren't home. They had gone to some dinner with friends and wouldn't be back until late. I thought about texting my dad, but something told me to just watch instead. The 3 men were moving around our backyard like they owned the place. They went to the far corner near where our fence meets the woods and started digging. Not a shallow hole either. They were really putting their backs into it. Then Ramon went to his truck and came back carrying this weird-looking rock. Even from my window, I could see there was something carved into it, like a face, but not a human face. It had these wide, round eyes and a mouth that seemed too big, with thin lips pulled back in what looked like a grin. Just looking at it made my skin crawl. After they put the rock in the hole, things got even weirder. Ramon brought out a small white goat. I'm not making this up. A live goat in our suburban backyard. The poor thing was bleeding and trying to get away, but they held it down over the hole. I should have done something, called someone, but I just sat there, frozen, watching as my uncle pulled out this curved knife. The goat's cries suddenly stopped, and I saw blood pouring down into the hole, soaking that creepy stone face. The whole time they were chanting in this language I didn't recognize. It wasn't Spanish. It had this rhythmic quality, almost like they were singing. The sound carried through my cracked window, and I swear it made the air feel heavy, like right before a thunderstorm. After they finished with the goat, I can't bring myself to describe everything they did. They partially filled the hole, leaving the rock buried but not completely covered. Then they just cleaned up and left, like they just finished a barbecue or something normal. When my parents got home, I didn't say anything. What could I say? Hey, Uncle Ramon slaughtered a goat in our backyard over some weird rock. They'd think I was crazy or making things up. Plus, I could tell my dad was already stressed about Ramon being in town. For about 2 weeks, nothing happened. Ramon and his friends came back once, dug up the rock, and took it with them. I watched from my window again as they carefully wrapped it in this red cloth. The rock was different now, darker, like it had absorbed the blood. They treated it with this weird reverence, like it was something precious. After they left with the rock, I thought that was the end of it. I tried to forget what I'd seen, told myself it was just some weird cultural thing I didn't understand. Then came that night. That night I still can't fully explain. It was a Tuesday. My parents were asleep, and I was up late watching some streaming show on my laptop. It was probably around 2 in the morning. My window was cracked open a bit because it was a nice spring night, warm with a light breeze. I remember noticing how loud the crickets were. There must have been thousands of them in the woods behind our house, all chirping away. The breeze was rustling the leaves in the trees, just normal night sounds, you know. Then everything went silent, not gradually, but all at once, like someone had hit a mute button on the world. At first I thought maybe I'd gone deaf. I snapped my fingers next to my ear, and I could hear that just fine. But outside, nothing. No crickets, no wind in the leaves, not even the distant sound of cars on the highway. That silence was so wrong, so unnatural, that it made my heart start racing. I sat up, in bed, staring at my window. The curtains were moving slightly from the breeze, but there was no sound. That's when I saw them. Fingers, but not human fingers. They were pitch black, not like dark skin, but black like a void, like they were made of pure darkness. They were impossibly long and thin, with these slightly pointed tips that weren't quite claws, but definitely weren't normal fingertips either. They appeared at the bottom of my window, curling over the edge like something was trying to pull itself up to look in, or get in. I couldn't move. I literally could not make my body respond. It was like every muscle had locked up in terror. My laptop slid off my legs onto the bed, but I couldn't even reach to close it. The fingers, there were 5 of them, began to work at the window frame, trying to pull it up higher. They moved with this horrible precision, like they knew exactly what they were doing. They didn't make any noise at all. No scratching, no tapping, just this silent, deliberate movement. I sat there, paralyzed, watching these impossible fingers trying to open my window wider. My mind was screaming at me to move, to yell for my parents, to do something, but my body wouldn't respond. The window began to slide up, inch by inch. I could feel cold air flowing in, but it wasn't natural cold. It was like the kind of cold you feel when you're sick with a high fever. It went straight to your bones. Just as the window was about half open, enough for something to slip through, I heard a car door slam somewhere down the street. A normal, everyday sound that seemed to break whatever spell had fallen over everything. The fingers froze for a moment, then withdrew. Not quickly like they were startled, but slowly, deliberately, like whatever they belonged to was simply deciding to wait for another opportunity. As soon as they disappeared, the sounds came rushing back. The crickets, the breeze, even a distant dog barking. It was like the world had been unpaused. I lunged for my window and slammed it shut, locking it and pulling the curtains closed. Then I turned on every light in my room and sat in the corner of my bed, back against the wall, until morning came. I didn't sleep at all. I kept thinking I could see shadows moving under my door or hear breathing outside my window. When the sun finally came up, I was a wreck. At breakfast, my mom noticed how exhausted I looked and asked if I was feeling okay. I almost told her everything right then. But my dad was sitting there reading the news on his tablet, and something stopped me. Some gut feeling that telling them would make things worse, not better. That night, I pushed my dresser in front of my window and made sure every window and door in the house was locked before I went to bed. I still didn't sleep much. This has been going on for weeks now. Those fingers haven't returned, at least not that I've seen, but other things have happened. Sometimes I'll wake up at exactly 3:33 in the morning, feeling like someone's watching me. My room will be ice cold, even though the rest of the house is normal. Twice I've found scratches on the outside of my window, high up where no animal could reach. Last week, I finally worked up the courage to ask my dad about Uncle Ramon's beliefs. He got this dark look on his face and told me not to worry about it. When I pressed him, mentioning that I'd seen Ramon in our yard, he got angry, which never happens, and told me to stay out of adult business. Later that night, I overheard my parents arguing. My mom was saying something about how Ramon had promised it wouldn't affect us, and my dad was insisting that the offering was necessary and that it would keep it contained. I don't know what it is. I don't know what they contained or why it seems focused on me now. All I know is that whatever came to my window that night wasn't human, and I'm terrified it's going to come back. I haven't seen my uncle since that day with the rock. My parents won't tell me where he is or when he's coming back. I've tried researching Santeria online, but everything I find seems watered down or vague. The worst part is, I feel like I'm being watched all the time now. Not just at home, but everywhere. At school, at the mall, even when I'm with friends. Sometimes I'll catch a glimpse of something dark out of the corner of my eye, but when I turn to look, there's nothing there. I don't know what to do. I can't tell anyone. They'd think I'm crazy. I can't move out. I'm only 17. And I can't confront my parents again without revealing how much I saw. All I know is that my uncle did something that night. He opened something, or awakened something, or called something. And now it's here, watching, waiting. And I think it wants me. Story 10. I still can't wrap my head around what happened last week. I've been camping my whole life, seen plenty of weird stuff in the backcountry, but nothing like this. I keep replaying it in my mind, trying to make sense of it. So my buddy Ryan and I had been planning this trip for months. We're both pretty experienced outdoorsmen. We've been best friends since high school and try to get out into the wilderness at least a few times a year. This time we wanted to go somewhere really off the beaten path. Ryan found this old campsite up an abandoned logging road that wasn't even on most maps. We loaded up my Jeep last Saturday morning with our gear, plenty of food and beer, and headed out. The drive took about 3 hours from town, with the last hour crawling up this absolutely brutal logging road. We're talking serious 4-4 territory, massive ruts, fallen branches, rocks the size of basketballs. My suspension was screaming the whole way. Several times I thought we might have to turn back, but somehow we made it through. The campsite itself was this small clearing, surrounded by dense forest. You could tell it hadn't been maintained in years. There were a couple of old fire rings with stones blackened from countless fires, and a few weathered picnic tables that looked like they might collapse if you sneezed near them. The whole place had this feeling of being forgotten by time. No cell service, obviously. Complete isolation. We started setting up our tents around 3 in the afternoon. The weather was perfect, not too hot, clear skies. While I was hammering in tent stakes, Ryan mentioned he needed to take a leak and wandered off to check out what looked like outhouses down a small hill about 40 meters from our camp. I didn't pay much attention, just kept unpacking our stuff. A few minutes later, I looked up and saw Ryan standing at the first outhouse. He opened the door, stood there for maybe 10 seconds, then closed it and moved to the second outhouse. Something about the way he was moving seemed off. He checked that one quickly, then headed back toward our camp. When he got back, his face looked weird. Not scared exactly, but definitely unsettled. "Dude, you need to go check out that first outhouse," he said. I laughed, thinking he'd found something gross. "No thanks, man, I'm good." "I'm serious," he insisted. "There's something, just go look." I figured he'd found a dead animal, or maybe some obscene graffiti. "Is it full of shit? Because I'm not interested in—" "Just go look," he cut me off. "Trust me." So I trudged down the hill, already regretting this little detour. The outhouses were these ancient wooden structures, probably built decades ago. The wood was gray and weathered, with spots of green moss growing on the north side. The door to the first one hung slightly crooked on its hinges. I pulled it open, bracing for the smell, but it actually wasn't that bad. What I wasn't prepared for was what I found inside. 3 large backpacks were lined up against the back wall. Not cheap ones either. These were serious expedition packs, the kind that cost hundreds of dollars. High-end stuff that serious hikers use for multi-day treks. They were just sitting there, perfectly arranged, in an abandoned outhouse in the middle of nowhere. I stood there for a moment, confused. Who would leave expensive gear like this? And why in an outhouse of all places? Curiosity got the better of me. I knelt down and carefully unzipped the first pack. Inside was exactly what you'd expect. A high-quality sleeping bag compressed into its stuff sack, a small camp stove, cookware, clothes neatly folded, water filter, headlamp. Everything methodically organized, the work of someone who knew what they were doing in the backcountry. Nothing unusual, except for the fact it was abandoned in an outhouse. The second pack was similar, another sleeping bag, more clothes, a first aid kit, some freeze-dried meals, a pocket knife, water bottles. Again, all high-quality gear, packed with care. It was the third backpack that made my skin crawl. When I unzipped it, I found myself staring at Skittles. The entire 80-liter backpack was filled to the brim with nothing but Skittles candy. Family-sized bags, regular packs, fun-sized packets, special edition flavors I'd never even seen in stores. Wild berry, tropical, original, sour, even some limited editions and types I didn't recognize with foreign writing on them. Just bag after bag of Skittles, meticulously packed to maximize the space. No clothes, no gear, no camping equipment, just an enormous stash of rainbow-colored candy. I sat back on my heels, completely baffled. The hair on my arms was standing up. Something about this felt deeply wrong. Who brings 3 expedition backpacks miles into the wilderness, only to abandon them in an outhouse? And who fills an entire backpack with nothing but Skittles? I carefully zipped everything back up exactly as I'd found it and returned to our campsite. Ryan was waiting for me, his face expectant. "Did you see it?" he asked. "Yeah, I said, still processing. What the hell, right? We spent the next hour throwing out theories. Maybe it was some kind of drop for drug smugglers. But why would smugglers use such expensive backpacks? And what would be the point of the Skittles? A prank? Seemed like an awful lot of effort for something no one would likely discover. Someone having a mental breakdown? Possibly, but how did they get here without a vehicle? The sun was starting to set, and I found myself glancing repeatedly down the hill toward the outhouses. The whole situation gave me the creeps. We decided to leave everything exactly as we found it and keep an eye out for anyone coming through the area. That night, sitting around the campfire, we kept our voices low, as if someone might be listening from the darkness beyond our circle of light. We'd brought a bottle of whiskey, and I found myself drinking more than I'd planned, trying to shake the uneasiness. Before turning in, I walked to the edge of our campsite and shined my flashlight down toward the outhouses. The beam caught the weathered wood, making long shadows stretch across the ground. Everything was still. No movement, no sounds except the normal forest noises. But I couldn't shake the feeling we were being watched. I barely slept that night. Every crack of a branch or rustle of leaves jolted me awake. I kept imagining someone sneaking into our camp, someone who had very specific reasons for leaving 3 backpacks in an outhouse. By morning, I was exhausted and jumpy. Ryan suggested we hike around the area to see if we could find any signs of other campers or hikers. We spent most of the day exploring the surrounding forest, following what looked like game trails and old, overgrown paths. We didn't find a single footprint, campsite, or any evidence that other humans had been there recently. We stayed 4 nights total. Each day, one of us would check the outhouses. The backpacks remained untouched, exactly as we'd left them. We never saw another person, never heard a vehicle on the logging road, never noticed any signs that anyone else was in the area. The whole time, that sense of wrongness hung over me like a cloud. I found myself staring into the forest, convinced someone was watching us. Several times I thought I saw movement among the trees, but when I focused, there was nothing there. Ryan said I was freaking myself out, but I noticed he kept his hunting knife closer than usual. On our last morning, as we were packing up to leave, Ryan asked what we should do about the backpacks. "We should tell someone," I said. "Those could belong to missing hikers or something." We took photos of the backpacks and their contents with our phones. As a final check, I opened the Skittles backpack one more time. Still nothing but candy. I picked up one of the packages, a flavor called Dark Side that I'd never seen before. The packaging seemed normal, not tampered with. I put it back exactly as I'd found it. Once we got back to civilization and had cell service again, I called the local conservation office and reported what we'd found. The officer took down all the details, the location of the campsite, descriptions of the backpacks, what was inside them. He seemed particularly interested in the Skittles backpack, asking me to repeat that part several times. "Have there been any missing hikers reported in that area?" I asked. "Not that I'm aware of," he said, "but I'll make some calls." He took my contact information and said someone would follow up, but it's been over a week now and I haven't heard anything. I've called the office twice more, but each time I'm told the information has been passed along to the appropriate department. I can't stop thinking about those backpacks, especially the one filled with Skittles. Who does that? What possible reason could someone have for hauling pounds and pounds of candy miles into the wilderness, only to abandon it in an outhouse? The more I think about it, the less sense it makes. Ryan keeps telling me to let it go, that it was probably just some weird prank or some hikers had to abandon their gear for whatever reason. but I can't shake the feeling that we stumbled onto something. I don't even know what. Something not right. I've been having trouble sleeping since we got back. I keep dreaming about those backpacks and waking up with this overwhelming sense of dread. Sometimes in my dreams, I open the third backpack, and instead of Skittles, there's something else inside, something I can never quite remember when I wake up. I don't know if I'll ever get answers. Part of me wants to go back there to see if the backpacks are still in that outhouse. Another part of me never wants to set foot on that logging road again. Whatever happened out there, whatever story we stumbled into the middle of, I have a feeling it's better left unfinished. Story 11. I've spent a long time wondering if I should share this. It's not something I talk about, even with my closest friends. But after reading so many similar experiences here, I thought maybe putting this into words might help me process what happened. This all went down about 3 years ago, when I was 17. I grew up in Oakwood, your typical suburban town with white picket fences and neighborhood barbecues. Nothing exciting ever happened there. My mom always had this weird connection with nature. She wasn't a full-on hippie or anything, but she'd always pause to feel the wind before a storm, or know exactly when certain flowers would bloom. As a kid, I thought everyone's mom could do that. When I hit my teens, I started getting curious about my own sensitivity, as Mom called it. I could sense energies in places, like the heaviness in our town's old cemetery, or the lightness I felt in our backyard garden. Looking back, I should have just accepted this as a cool quirk and moved on. But no, 17-year-old me had to go digging deeper. It started with innocent stuff. I bought some crystals at a New Age shop in the mall. I'd place them on my windowsill to charge in the moonlight. I made little sachets of herbs for good luck. Honestly, it was mostly for the aesthetic at first. I thought it made me seem mysterious and different from the other kids at school. Then I found this book at a used bookstore. The cover was worn black leather, and the pages smelled like they'd been sitting in someone's attic for decades. It contained simple spells and rituals, nothing too crazy. I tried a few, a spell for better grades before my calculus test, another to help me get along better with my little brother. And weirdly, they worked. Or at least I convinced myself they did. That success made me bolder. I started ordering more books online, ones with darker content. I created a small altar in the corner of my bedroom, hidden behind my desk where my parents wouldn't see it. I'd light black candles and chant words I barely understood. I'd draw symbols on pieces of paper and burn them, watching the smoke curl toward my ceiling. I felt powerful, in control. The first strange thing I noticed was about 3 months into my deeper practices. I was home alone, sitting cross-legged on my bedroom floor with candles lit around me. I was attempting a spell to reveal hidden knowledge, whatever that meant. As I finished the ritual, I heard very distinct footsteps in the hallway outside my room, heavy ones, like boots on our hardwood floor. I froze. My heart was pounding as I blew out the candles and quickly shoved my witchcraft stuff under my bed. I called out, "Hello?" No answer. When I opened my bedroom door, the hallway was empty. I checked every room in the house, but there was nobody there. I told myself it was just the house settling, or my imagination running wild. But the footsteps came back, not just when I was alone. My parents heard them too. My dad would grab his baseball bat and search the house, finding nothing. My mom would look at me with this worried expression, like she knew something was wrong but couldn't figure out what. Then my room started getting cold, like seriously cold. In the middle of summer, when it was 90 degrees outside, my room felt like a freezer. My dad checked the vents, thinking something was wrong with our AC system, but the rest of the house was perfectly normal. Just my room was affected. The energy in my room changed too. It's hard to explain to someone who hasn't experienced it, but it was like walking through molasses. The air felt thick and heavy. I started dreading going to bed at night. I'd lie there, staring at my ceiling, feeling like something was watching me from the darkest corner of my room. I didn't connect these occurrences to my witchcraft practices at first. Stupid, right? Looking back, it's so obvious. But at 17, I thought I was untouchable. If anything, the creepy stuff made me feel even more powerful, like I was actually tapping into something real. It wasn't until my friend Jess stayed over that I realized how bad things had gotten. She woke me up in the middle of the night, her face pale. "Your room is freezing," she whispered, "and I keep hearing someone walking around." That was my wake-up call. If someone else could feel it too, then it wasn't just in my head. The next day I went to my local church. I'm not religious. My family never went to church, but I was desperate. An older woman there gave me a small silver cross and told me to keep it under my pillow for protection. That night, I placed the cross under my pillow along with a handwritten prayer I'd copied from a website. I thought it would make things better. It made them worse, so much worse. As soon as I turned off my light and lay down, I heard whispers. Not English, something guttural and ancient sounding. They seemed to come from every corner of my room at once. The temperature dropped so low I could see, my breath in the darkness. My blankets did nothing against the bone-deep chill. I tried to get up, to run to my parents' room, but I couldn't move. It was like something heavy was sitting on my chest, pinning me to the bed. I could breathe, I could blink, but that was it. My limbs wouldn't respond to my brain's frantic commands. And then I saw her. In the corner of my room, a shape darker than the darkness around it. A woman, or something shaped like a woman. She had no features I could make out, just a black silhouette with what looked like long, flowing hair. She moved toward my bed, not walking but gliding, like her feet didn't touch the ground. She leaned over me. I couldn't see eyes, but I felt her staring. The pressure on my chest increased until I thought my ribs would crack. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. I was certain I was going to die. In that moment of absolute terror, something strange happened inside me. Instead of fighting against the paralysis or screaming in my mind, I felt a sudden calm. I don't know where it came from. Maybe some survival instinct kicking in, or maybe something outside myself. But I mentally directed a thought toward this entity. I forgive you. Whatever you are, whatever you want, I forgive you. The change was immediate. The pressure eased. The whispers stopped. The dark figure straightened up, no longer looming over me. And the feeling coming from her shifted completely. The malevolence was replaced by something that felt like sadness, deep, ancient sadness. It was so overwhelming that tears started streaming down my face, though I still couldn't move. She stood there for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Then she simply faded away, not suddenly, but gradually, like smoke dispersing in a gentle breeze. When I could move again, I ran to the bathroom and threw up. I sat on the cold tile floor until morning, too terrified to go back to my room. The next day, I destroyed everything. My altar, my candles, my books, all of it went into a garbage bag that I personally took to the dumpster behind our local grocery store. I threw away the crystals, the herbs, everything that had any connection to what I'd been doing. I went back to the church and took a Bible, which I kept on my nightstand. Things got better after that, but they never went completely back to normal. The footsteps became less frequent. The cold spots came and went. I still felt watched sometimes, but the oppressive fear was gone. I slept with my lights on for months. About a year after the incident, our house caught fire. It started in the electrical wiring near my bedroom. We all got out safely, but the house was damaged badly enough that we had to move out while it was repaired. We stayed with my aunt for 6 months while the construction crews rebuilt almost half our house. When we moved back in, something had changed. My room, which had been completely gutted and rebuilt, felt light, normal. No cold spots, no footsteps, no feeling of being watched. Whatever had been there was gone. I'm 20 now, studying psychology at the State University. I've tried to find rational explanations for what happened. Sleep paralysis, overactive imagination, carbon monoxide poisoning even. But none of those explanations account for everything, especially the things my family and friends experienced too. I don't practice witchcraft anymore. I don't mess with things I don't understand. That sensitivity I inherited from my mom. I use it for simpler things now, appreciating a beautiful sunset, feeling connected to the world around me, not trying to control it or tap into its darker aspects. Sometimes I wonder about that entity, who she was, what she wanted, why she responded to forgiveness when nothing else worked. Was she human once? Was she even real? I'll probably never know. But I do know this. There are boundaries we're not meant to cross, forces we're not equipped to handle. I learned that lesson the hard way, and I'm lucky I survived to tell about it. If you're reading this and thinking about exploring the darker side of the occult, please reconsider. Some doors, once opened, are very difficult to close. Story 12. I've spent most of my life in the outdoors, hiking, camping, trekking, you name it. My dad was a forest ranger, so I basically grew up with dirt under my fingernails and pine needles in my hair. I'm not saying this to brag, just to make it clear that I'm not some city slicker who freaks out at every owl hoot or snapping twig. I know the woods, their rhythms, their sounds, which is why what happened to me 3 weeks ago has messed me up so badly. I'd been planning this solo trip to Raven Creek for months. It's this gorgeous stretch of old-growth forest about 4 hours from my place. Not exactly a secret spot, but definitely off the beaten path. No maintained trails, no facilities, just pure wilderness. I'd been there twice before with friends, but this time I wanted the solitude. Work had been kicking my ass, and I needed to reset. I arrived at the trailhead around noon on a Friday. The weather was perfect, clear skies, around 65 degrees, with just enough breeze to keep the bugs away. I parked my truck at this little clearing where an old logging road ends and started my hike in. The plan was simple. Follow the creek upstream for about 7 miles, set up camp at this small clearing I remembered, then spend Saturday exploring some of the ridges before heading back Sunday. The hike in was everything I needed. No cell service, no emails, just me and my thoughts and the sounds of the forest. I took my time, stopping to identify mushrooms, watching a pair of hawks circling overhead. I felt the tension in my shoulders start to dissolve with every mile. I reached my intended campsite around 4 in the afternoon. It was just as I remembered. A small flat area about 30 yards from the creek, sheltered by a stand of ancient pines. I set up my tent, gathered firewood, and filtered some water from the creek. Then I just sat there, watching the sunlight filter through the trees, listening to the water rushing over rocks. I cooked a simple dinner on my camp stove, ramen with some dehydrated vegetables and a can of tuna mixed in. Nothing fancy, but it tasted amazing out there. As darkness fell, I got a small fire going. Not for warmth, really, just for the comfort of it. I sat there nursing a flask of whiskey, watching the flames, feeling completely at peace. Around 10, I doused the fire, brushed my teeth, and crawled into my sleeping bag. I remember thinking how perfectly quiet it was as I drifted off. Just the gentle gurgle of the creek and the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze. I don't know exactly what time it was when I woke up. My watch said a little after midnight, but it felt later somehow. What I do know is that I went from dead asleep to wide awake in an instant, my heart already pounding before I even knew why. Something had changed. The forest was silent, completely, utterly silent. Anyone who's spent time in the woods knows they're never truly quiet, even at night. There's always something, insects chirping, the distant call of a night bird, small animals moving in the underbrush. But now, there was nothing. It was as if the entire forest was holding its breath. I lay there in my sleeping bag, suddenly aware of how exposed I felt in my little tent. I tried to tell myself it was nothing. Maybe a predator was passing through the area, causing the wildlife to go quiet. Normal forest behavior. But the silence felt wrong, oppressive, like the air itself had thickened. That's when I heard the first footstep, a deliberate crunch of leaves, maybe 50 yards away, then another and another. Slow, methodical footsteps moving through the forest, not the random patter of a deer or the quick scurrying of a raccoon. These were heavy, purposeful steps, and they were heading toward my camp. I reached for my knife, a good fixed blade I always keep within reach when camping. My headlamp was right next to it, but I didn't turn it on. Some instinct told me to stay silent, to pretend I was still asleep. The footsteps continued, getting closer. They seemed to be circling my campsite now, moving in a deliberate pattern around the perimeter. Whoever, or whatever, was out there was taking their time, moving slowly but steadily through the underbrush. I tried to control my breathing, to listen over the hammering of my heart. The steps were maybe 20 yards away now, still circling. I caught myself analyzing the sound, trying to figure out what was making it. A bear would be louder, clumsier. A person would, well, a normal person would call out, wouldn't they? Would announce themselves, especially at this hour. The circling continued for what felt like hours, but was probably 15 minutes. Then the pattern changed. The footsteps started moving closer to my tent, deliberate, unhurried, as if whatever was out there had all the time in the world. 10 yards away, then 5, then right outside my tent. I lay completely still, knife clutched in my sweating hand, eyes fixed on the thin nylon wall of my tent. I could sense a presence just on the other side. I couldn't see anything. There was no moon that night, and the forest was pitch black. But I knew something was standing there, inches away, separated from me by nothing but a sheet of fabric. Then it started to move again, slowly circling my tent. 1, 2, 3 times around, each circuit taking maybe a minute, methodical, studying. I could hear the footsteps and something else, a faint sound like breathing, but not quite. It was deeper, more guttural, and then it stopped, right at the foot of my tent. What happened next still makes my skin crawl when I think about it. There was a sound, not quite a voice, not quite an animal noise. It was low, rumbling, almost like someone trying to speak underwater. A series of guttural murmurs that didn't form any language I've ever heard, but clearly had purpose, had meaning. It wasn't random animal noises. It was communication. It was trying to say something. I don't know how long I lay there, paralyzed with fear. My muscles were cramping from the tension, but I didn't dare move. Eventually, After what must have been several minutes of those terrible sounds, there was silence again. Then the footsteps resumed, moving away from my tent, back into the forest. I listened as they receded, the sound of cracking twigs and rustling leaves growing fainter until I couldn't hear them anymore. But I still didn't move. I lay there, knife gripped in my hand, ears straining for any sound of return, until the first gray light of dawn started to filter through the trees. Only then did I finally allow myself to move, every muscle screaming in protest as I sat up. I waited another half hour until I could see clearly outside before unzipping my tent with shaking hands. The forest looked normal in the morning light. Birds were singing again, the creek gurgled peacefully. It would have been easy to convince myself I'd dreamed the whole thing, some strange nightmare brought on by exhaustion or the unfamiliar surroundings. Except for the tracks. They circled my campsite exactly where I'd heard the footsteps. Large, deep impressions in the soft forest floor, spaced about 3 feet apart. They weren't animal tracks, at least not any animal I know. They looked almost human, but bigger, deeper, with strange marks at the edges that I couldn't identify. And they circled my tent 3 times, just as I'd heard. I've never packed up camp so quickly in my life. I didn't bother with breakfast or coffee. I didn't even fill my water bottles. I just stuffed everything into my pack as fast as I could and started hiking back to my truck, moving at a pace that was just short of running. The whole way back, I felt like I was being watched. The forest that had seemed so welcoming the day before now felt oppressive, hostile. Every shadow might be hiding something. Every rustle in the underbrush made me flinch. I made it back to my truck in just under 2 hours, a hike that had taken me 4 on the way in. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. I drove home in a daze, checking my rearview mirror constantly, irrationally afraid that something had followed me out of those woods. I've been trying to make sense of what happened ever since. I've researched local folklore, looked up reports of strange encounters in the area. I've found nothing that matches what I experienced. Part of me wants to go back, to try to find those tracks again, to prove to myself that it was real. But a deeper, more primitive part of me knows that would be a terrible mistake. I still go hiking, I still camp, but not alone anymore, and not in Raven Creek. Some places in the wilderness deserve to remain undisturbed. Some mysteries are better left unsolved. Whatever was watching me that night, whatever circled my tent and made those inhuman sounds, it's still out there. And sometimes, in the moment between wakefulness and sleep, I can still hear those guttural murmurs, like something trying to speak words that human ears were never meant to hear. Story 13. I still get chills thinking about that night in the northern Ontario wilderness. My wife Emily and I had been drowning in stress from our jobs. I was working 60-hour weeks at an accounting firm, and she was dealing with back-to-back deadlines at her marketing agency. We desperately needed to disconnect, so we planned a quick weekend camping trip to recharge. I knew this spot in the Jack Pine forests about 3 hours north of Thunder Bay. I'd camped there twice before with my college buddies, and it always felt like the perfect balance. Remote enough to feel like you're truly away from everything, but not so isolated that you're completely screwed if something goes wrong. The campsite was about 800 meters from where we parked our Honda CR-V, following a narrow trail through dense forest. We arrived around 1 in the afternoon on a Friday in late September. The weather seemed perfect, about 15 degrees Celsius, slight breeze, partly cloudy. Nothing on the weather apps indicated any issues for the weekend. The hike-in was peaceful, with Emily commenting on how good the forest smelled, that mix of pine and earth that you can't get anywhere else. The campsite was exactly as I remembered it, a small clearing surrounded by those tall, skinny jack pines. The ground was soft with years of fallen needles, almost spongy under our boots. We set up our tent, a 4-person north face that was probably overkill for just the two of us, but I like having the extra space. Emily collected some rocks to make a small fire ring while I gathered deadfall for firewood. By 4 in the afternoon, we had everything set up. Our tent was secured with extra stakes, just a habit I've always had. Our sleeping bags were laid out inside, and we had a decent pile of firewood stacked and covered with a tarp in case of rain. I got a small fire going, and we sat on a fallen log I dragged over, drinking the beers we'd packed in. For the first time in months, I felt my shoulders relax. Emily was smiling, taking pictures of the campsite and the way the sunlight filtered through the trees. We talked about nothing important, just enjoying the quiet and each other's company. Around 6, we started dinner. Simple camping food, foil packets with sausages, potatoes, and bell peppers that we nestled into the coals of the fire. We were just about to pull them out when I noticed the wind picking up. It wasn't gradual. It went from the occasional light breeze we'd had all day to genuine gusts that made the flames of our fire dance sideways. "Weather changing?" Emily asked, looking up at the swaying treetops. "Looks like it," I said, trying to sound unconcerned. "Let's eat quickly and secure anything that might blow away." By the time we finished our dinner, the wind had intensified even more. The jack pines around us were swaying noticeably, their thin trunks bending in a way that made me increasingly uneasy. These weren't sturdy oaks or maples. Jack pines are relatively fragile trees with shallow root systems. Great for a forest that experiences periodic fires, terrible for withstanding serious wind. I checked my phone, but we had no service. The weather app still showed the forecast from when we'd last had reception near the highway. Nothing concerning. Emily was starting to look worried as the wind continued to strengthen, causing the trees to creak and groan around us. "Should we pack up and head back to the car?" she asked, her voice tight. I was considering it when we heard it, a sharp, explosive crack about 100 meters to our left, followed by the unmistakable sound of a tree crashing through branches and hitting the ground with a boom that I could feel through my feet. Emily jumped, grabbing my arm. "That was a tree falling," I said unnecessarily. "We need to—" Before I could finish, another crack sounded, this time to our right and closer, maybe 50 meters away. Another tree down. My heart was hammering now. The wind was howling through the forest, and in the fading light, I could see the jack pines bending at alarming angles. Some were swaying so far, I was sure they would snap at any moment. "We need to get out of here," Emily said, her voice rising with panic. I looked at the darkening forest, thinking rapidly. The trail back to our car wound through dense stands of these same jack pines. If trees were already coming down, hiking 800 meters in the dark through falling trees seemed like suicide. But staying put didn't feel much safer. "We can't risk the trail right now," I decided. "It's getting dark, and we'd be walking through the same forest, just with no visibility and no idea where trees might fall. So we just stay here and hope nothing falls on our tent?" Her voice cracked. I surveyed our small clearing. We had about a 20-foot diameter of open space around our tent, but tall jack pines loomed on all sides. An idea formed. "Help me clear this space more," I said, kicking dirt onto our fire to extinguish it. The last thing we needed was a wind-blown ember starting a forest fire on top of everything else. We spent the next frantic half-hour working with our camping hatchet and folding saw, cutting down any small saplings in our clearing and dragging away fallen branches, to create the largest possible buffer zone around our tent. All the while, the forest around us groaned and creaked like a sinking ship, punctuated every few minutes by the heart-stopping crack and crash of another falling tree. By the time it was fully dark, around 8:30, we'd done all we could. Our clearing was marginally larger, and we'd moved our tent to what seemed like the safest spot, away from the tallest, most precarious-looking trees. We climbed inside, fully dressed, including our boots, with our headlamps and emergency gear within immediate reach. The sound inside the tent was terrifying. The nylon walls shuddered and flapped violently with each gust. Outside, the wind was no longer coming in distinct gusts, but had become a constant roar. I kept picturing those thin jack pines snapping like toothpicks and crashing down on us. "Do you think we should have tried for the car?" Emily whispered, clutching my hand so tightly it hurt. "No," I said, trying to sound confident. "We'd be moving targets out there. At least here we've cleared some space." We both jumped as another crack and crash sounded, this one close enough that we felt the impact through the ground. Emily let out a small sob. "It's okay," I lied. Statistically, the chances of a tree hitting this exact spot are tiny. But that's exactly what made it so terrifying. We were completely at the mercy of random chance. If a tree happened to fall in our direction, our tent might as well have been made of tissue paper for all the protection it would offer. I lay awake all night, holding Emily's hand, listening to the storm rage around us. Every few minutes brought another tree down somewhere in the forest. I found myself counting the seconds between gusts, between crashes, as if establishing a pattern would somehow give me control over the situation. My body was rigid with tension, flinching at every sound. Around 3 in the morning, I felt Emily shaking beside me and realized she was silently crying. I put my arm around her and we lay there, both pretending for the other's sake that we weren't terrified. "If we make it through this," she whispered, "I'm never camping again." I couldn't even argue with her. In that moment, I was making the same promise to myself. The wind continued its assault until sometime after 5 in the morning, when it finally began to ease. By 6, as the first gray light of dawn filtered through the trees, the forest had fallen into an eerie silence, broken only by the occasional creak of stressed wood. We waited until we could see clearly before unzipping the tent. The scene that greeted us was shocking. Our small clearing was still intact, but the forest around us was transformed. Fallen jack pines lay in every direction like massive pickup sticks. One massive tree had crashed down just 30 feet from our tent. Its trunk snapped clean through about 10 feet up from the base. If it had fallen in our direction instead, I couldn't even complete the thought. We didn't speak as we packed up camp, moving with the efficiency of people who couldn't get out of a place fast enough. We skipped breakfast, stuffing everything haphazardly into our packs. The forest that had seemed so peaceful yesterday now felt malevolent, like it was just waiting for another chance to crush us. The hike back to our car was nerve-wracking. The trail was blocked in 3 places by fallen trees, forcing us to climb over or find ways around. With each detour, I kept thinking about what would have happened if we'd tried to hike out during the night. We would have been completely lost, or worse. When we finally reached our car, Emily burst into tears of relief. I wasn't far behind, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key into the ignition. As we drove away, I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the entire forest collapse behind us. That night was 2 years ago, and it fundamentally changed me. I used to see the wilderness as a playground, a place for adventure with minimal risk if you were prepared. Now I understand how quickly nature can turn from beautiful to deadly, how completely powerless humans are against its force. I do still camp occasionally, but never in pine forests, and never without obsessively checking weather forecasts. Emily refused to go camping again until last summer, when she finally agreed to a trip in a designated campground with sturdy oak trees and clear emergency exits. Sometimes I still wake up at night thinking I hear the cracking of trees about to fall. I don't think that fear will ever completely leave me. Those hours in the tent, waiting to either live or die based purely on the random direction a tree might fall, showed me a kind of helplessness I never want to experience again. Story 14. I've been sitting on this experience for years, never really sharing the full story with anyone outside my family. I guess I'm finally ready to put it all out there. Even now, 20-some years later, I still get goosebumps thinking about that day in the basement and everything that followed. Growing up in Seattle in the 90s, our house was nothing special, just a typical two-story with a finished basement in a quiet neighborhood. My parents converted the basement into my bedroom when I was around 7 because my older sister wanted her own room upstairs. At first, I thought having the basement to myself was cool. It was bigger than any other room in the house, and I had space for all my toys and games. But there was always something off about that basement. I can't explain it exactly, but it never felt connected to the rest of the house, like it existed in its own separate bubble. The temperature was always different, colder, even when the heat was on. Sounds from upstairs seemed muffled and distant, as if they were coming from miles away, rather than just above my head. I remember that afternoon so clearly. It was a Saturday in October, and Seattle was having one of those rare, perfect fall days. Golden sunlight streamed through the small basement windows, making dust particles dance in the air. Mom was upstairs doing laundry, and my sister was at a friend's house. Dad was out running errands. I was playing with my Lego sets on the carpet, building some kind of spaceship. I remember feeling completely absorbed in what I was doing, the way kids get when they're playing. The house was quiet, except for the distant hum of the washing machine and the occasional car passing outside. Then something changed. I didn't hear anything at first. It was more like a shift in the air pressure. That feeling when someone enters a room behind you and you can sense their presence before you see them. The hairs on my arms stood up and I got this crawling sensation up my spine. I stopped playing mid-movement, a Lego piece clutched in my hand. The basement suddenly felt 10 degrees colder. I had this overwhelming certainty that someone or something was watching me from the darkest corner of the room, behind the old water heater. When I looked up, I noticed my bedroom door was moving. It had been closed all the way, but now it was slowly swinging open. Here's the thing that still haunts me. That door always creaked. Always. It had this distinctive horror movie-worthy squeak that announced anyone coming down to my room. My parents had tried WD-40 on the hinges multiple times, but that stubborn creak always came back within days. But now, complete silence. The door was opening inch by inch without making a single sound. I sat frozen, watching it move. There was no draft in the basement, never had been. The door kept opening until it was about halfway. My sister and I had decorated the door with these little plastic Halloween decorations the week before. Just cheap dollar store stuff with suction cups that stuck to the glass pane in the upper half of the door. One was a goofy ghost and another was a pumpkin. As I watched, the ghost decoration suddenly unstuck itself and fell to the floor. It didn't slide down slowly like suction cups do when they're losing grip. It literally looked like invisible fingers had reached up and yanked it off the glass. That was it for me. I scrambled to my feet, knocking over my half-built spaceship, and bolted for the stairs. I remember taking them 3 at a time, nearly falling in my panic. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I found my mom in the kitchen folding towels. I was crying and babbling, trying to explain what happened. I expected her to dismiss it, to tell me it was just my imagination, or maybe a draft I hadn't noticed. But she didn't. Instead, she put down the laundry and got really quiet. She asked me to repeat exactly what had happened, and I watched her face grow pale as I described the door opening silently and the decoration falling. Has this happened before? She asked me, her voice unnaturally steady. I admitted that I'd been feeling weird in my room for weeks. I told her about waking up with the sensation of being watched, about toys that weren't where I left them, about the strange cold spots that moved around the room. That's when she sat me down and told me something I hadn't known. She'd been experiencing things too. Nothing she could prove or point to definitively, but enough to make her uncomfortable. She'd hear the basement door open and close when everyone was accounted for. Sometimes she'd find things in different places than where she left them. After my experience that day, it was like whatever was in our house realized we knew it was there, and it stopped hiding. Over the next several hours, it was like all hell broke loose. My dad came home around 3 o'clock, and we were sitting in the living room, still shaken. I remember him walking in with groceries and immediately asking what was wrong. Before either of us could answer, a framed family photo on the wall suddenly crashed to the floor, the glass shattering everywhere. Dad just stood there, grocery bags in hand, staring at the broken frame. "What the hell was that?" he asked. The picture had been securely hung for years. My mom started to explain what had happened in the basement when the lights in the kitchen flickered rapidly, not like a power surge, more like someone was flipping the switch up and down. I've never seen my dad look scared before that moment. He's always been the practical one, the fixer, there's a logical explanation for everything guy. But I watched his face change as he put down the groceries and walked over to inspect the light switch. No one was near it. "It's probably just faulty wiring," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. We all jumped when the doorbell rang. It was my sister being dropped off by her friend's mom. The moment she walked in, she sensed something was wrong. "Why is everyone being so weird?" she asked. Before anyone could answer, the TV turned on by itself, full volume, static only. My sister screamed and I started crying again. Dad rushed to unplug it, muttering about electrical problems. But we all knew it wasn't electrical problems. Something was in our house, and it was making itself known. As the day wore on, the activity escalated. Around dinner time, we were all sitting at the table, nobody really eating, just pushing food around on our plates. The tension was unbearable. Dad was trying to rationalize everything that had happened, suggesting drafts or faulty wiring or coincidences. That's when it happened, the thing that convinced even my skeptical father. A bottle of Tabasco sauce was sitting in the middle of the table. No one was touching it or even near it. Suddenly, it started to slide across the table. Not like it was pushed by vibrations or tilting. It moved deliberately in a perfectly straight line from one end of the table to the other. My dad went completely white. The bottle stopped right at the edge of the table, teetering there for a moment before going still. "Jesus Christ," my dad whispered. My mom grabbed my hand and my sister's under the table. I could feel her trembling. That night, none of us wanted to be alone. My sister and I ended up sleeping in our parents' room, all lights on. But sleep didn't come easily. Throughout the night, we heard footsteps, measured, deliberate steps, pacing back and forth in the basement. My room. The door to the basement would open and close, open and close. Around 3 in the morning, my mom suddenly sat up in bed. She looked different, determined, angry even. She got out of bed despite my dad trying to stop her. "I've had enough," she said. "This is our home." She marched downstairs, and we all followed, terrified to let her go alone, but equally scared to confront whatever was happening. When she reached the basement door, she threw it open. The air down there was freezing cold. We could see our breath, which made no sense for October in Seattle. My mom stood at the top of the basement stairs and started speaking. Not yelling, not panicking, just speaking firmly and clearly. "I don't know what you are or why you're here," she said, "but this is our home. You are not welcome here. This house and this family are protected through the blood of Christ, and you have no power here." She continued speaking, quoting Bible verses I didn't recognize. We weren't even particularly religious. Her voice grew stronger with each word, and then, I still get chills thinking about this. The cold air from the basement seemed to rush past us, up the stairs, like something was fleeing. The basement door slammed shut with such force that a picture fell off the wall nearby. After that, the house was quiet. Not the tense, waiting quiet from before, but a genuine peace. We all felt it, like a weight had been lifted. We never found out what was in our house. We debated moving, but after my mom's confrontation, the activity stopped almost completely. There were still occasional odd moments, a door closing on its own, the feeling of being watched, but nothing like the intensity of that day. Years later, my mom finally told me something she'd been keeping secret. In the weeks before my experience in the basement, she'd often hear the basement door open and close when she was home alone. She'd hear footsteps pacing in the dark down there. She said she would sometimes stand at the top of the stairs, unable to make herself go down, feeling like something was staring back up at her from the darkness. We moved away when I was 13 for unrelated reasons. My dad got a job in Portland, and we relocated. I've often wondered about the family that moved in after us, if they experienced anything similar. To this day, I can't explain what happened in that house. I've researched hauntings, tried to find information about the land our house was built on, looked into the history of the neighborhood. Nothing unusual ever turned up. All I know is what I experienced, what my whole family experienced on that day. The silent opening door, the decoration yanked off by invisible hands, the Tabasco bottle sliding across the table, the measured footsteps in the dark. Sometimes I still dream about that basement. In my dreams, I'm a child again, playing with my toys, and I look up to see the door slowly swinging open. But in the dreams, unlike reality, I see what's standing on the other side. I always wake up before I can make out what it is. And honestly, I'm grateful for that. Story 15. I still can't really explain what we found out there, and it's been almost 6 months now. I've tried researching, asking experts, even posting in some obscure forums, but nothing makes sense. I guess I'm hoping someone here might have encountered something similar, or have some kind of explanation that doesn't sound completely insane. It started as just a regular guy's trip. Me, Mark, Dave, and Alex have been friends since college, and we try to do at least one proper wilderness camping trip each year. We all live around Denver, and with our jobs and families, it's getting harder to coordinate these getaways. So we were all pretty excited when we finally locked in a long weekend in late September. The plan was simple: get away from everything. No cell service, no GPS, no bullshit. Just us, some maps, compasses, and the Colorado wilderness. We're all experienced hikers, not experts or anything, but we know what we're doing. We picked a spot about 2 hours west of Denver, this little mountain town that's basically just a general store, a gas station, and a few scattered houses. From there, we hiked in about 10 miles, following this old trail that eventually petered out into nothing. We set up our base camp on this nice flat area beneath a rocky outcrop. There was a stream nearby, and the spot gave us decent protection from the wind. The first day and night were perfect. We fished, drank beer, cooked over the campfire, talked shit like we always do. The sky was so clear that night, I swear I've never seen that many stars. It felt good to be disconnected. The second day, we decided to explore further west, where there weren't any trails marked on our topo maps, just wild forest, rugged terrain with these dense pine groves and occasional golden meadows. It was unseasonably warm for late September, probably around 70 degrees, but comfortable for hiking. We'd been walking for maybe 3 hours when Dave spotted this narrow animal trail following a dry gully. It looked like deer had worn it down over years, and it headed downhill in a direction we hadn't planned on going. But something about it seemed interesting, so we decided to follow it. The trail wound down through increasingly thick forest until suddenly it opened up into this perfectly circular clearing, maybe 100 yards across. And right in the middle stood this old cabin. Now, finding abandoned structures in the Colorado wilderness isn't that unusual. There are old mining cabins scattered throughout these mountains. But this one, something was immediately off about it. It was built from hand-hewn logs, not sawn timber, which meant it was really old. The roof slanted to one side, and there were no glass in the window frames. The whole structure seemed to be sagging, like it was slowly being crushed by time. But that wasn't what disturbed us. What freaked us out was the circle around it. About 50 feet from the cabin in every direction, there was this boundary. Inside the boundary, everything was wrong. The grass was yellow and patchy, bushes completely dried out and brittle looking. Outside the boundary was normal, healthy forest. The line between them was so distinct, you could have drawn it with a ruler. "What the hell?" Alex muttered, and his voice sounded strangely muffled, like the air was thicker somehow. We started walking around the perimeter of this dead zone, keeping safely outside it. Nobody needed to say it. None of us wanted to step inside that circle. As we circled around, we noticed small animal carcasses scattered throughout the dead zone. Squirrels, birds, even a couple of rabbits. They weren't decomposed or eaten by predators. They were just desiccated, dried out, like they'd been mummified, but perfectly intact. No blood, no signs of violence. "Guys, look at this," Mark called out when we reached the north side of the circle. He was pointing at a fallen tree that crossed the invisible boundary. The part inside the circle was completely gray and brittle, bark peeling away. The part outside was normal, healthy wood with green moss still growing on it. The transition happened exactly at the boundary line. I felt this crawling sensation on my skin, like when you're outside during a lightning storm and the air gets charged. Dave took out his phone, presumably to take a photo, then hesitated and put it back in his pocket. Later, he told me he suddenly felt strongly that he shouldn't document this place. I felt it too, this weird reluctance, almost like the place didn't want to be remembered. Could it be some kind of chemical spill? Alex suggested, but it didn't make any sense. There were no containers, no equipment, no smell of chemicals, and no way to get any heavy machinery out here. Plus, what chemical creates a perfect circle of death? Maybe it's natural gas or radon leaking from underground, Dave offered. But again, that wouldn't explain the perfect circular boundary. We spent maybe 20 minutes walking the perimeter, never stepping inside. No one suggested going closer to the cabin. In fact, no one even mentioned the cabin directly after we first saw it. It was like our minds were trying to slide away from thinking about it too directly. The whole time we were there, I realized there was no sound inside the circle. No birds, no insects, not even the rustle of wind through dead grass. Just this oppressive silence that seemed to push against your eardrums. Finally, Mark said, "We should head back. It'll be getting dark in a few hours." We all agreed too quickly, relieved to have an excuse, to leave. The hike back to camp was silent, each of us lost in our thoughts. The easy camaraderie from the morning had evaporated. That night around the campfire, we tried to talk about it, to make sense of what we'd seen. "Maybe it's some kind of government testing site," Alex suggested, but it seemed unlikely. The cabin looked ancient, and there were no signs of modern human activity. "Could be some kind of natural phenomenon," Dave said, "like those fairy circles in Africa, but bigger and deadlier." None of it made sense. We'd all seen the same thing, but trying to talk about it felt like trying to describe a color that doesn't exist. That night, I couldn't sleep. Our peaceful wilderness suddenly felt threatening, watchful. The wind in the trees sounded like whispers. I kept imagining that boundary creeping outward, expanding, reaching our camp while we slept. I pictured us drying out like those animals, becoming brittle husks under the stars. When dawn finally came, we made a unanimous decision to pack up and head back to civilization a day earlier than planned. No one complained or called anyone else a wuss for wanting to leave. We all felt it, this nameless dread that had seeped into our bones. The hike back to our cars was tense. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see something following us. When we finally reached the trailhead and saw our vehicles, the relief was overwhelming. We threw our packs in the trunks, made hasty plans to meet up the following weekend for beers, and drove our separate ways. That should have been the end of it. Just a weird experience in the woods, something to puzzle over and eventually forget. But I couldn't let it go. Over the next few weeks, I researched the area extensively. I checked historical records, land surveys, geological reports, anything I could get my hands on. I found nothing that explained what we saw. No record of development, no chemical dumping, no military testing. According to every official document, that area was untouched wilderness. I even contacted a forestry professor at Colorado State University, describing what we'd seen as precisely as I could. He was intrigued but skeptical. He suggested a fungal disease that affects multiple plant species, but admitted it wouldn't explain the perfect circular boundary or the animal deaths. One night, about a month after our trip, I called Mark to see if he was still thinking about it too. "Man, I've been having these dreams," he said, his voice low even though he lives alone. "About that cabin. In the dreams, I'm walking toward it, crossing that boundary, and I can feel myself drying out, like all the moisture is being pulled from my body. But I keep walking anyway." I'd been having similar dreams, but I hadn't told anyone. In mine, I'm standing at the window of the cabin, looking out. But I'm not me anymore. I'm something else, something ancient and patient, watching the forest, waiting. After 2 months, Alex called me out of the blue. "Have you been back there?" he asked without preamble. "No," I said, startled by the question. "Have you?" "No," he said quickly. "But I want to. I keep thinking about it, like it's calling me back." That scared me more than anything else, because despite all my research, despite the nightmares, despite the unexplainable wrongness of that place. I felt it too. This pull, like a hook behind my ribs, tugging me back toward that clearing. We've made a pact, the four of us. We're never going back there, and we're never telling anyone else the exact location. Something about that place feels dangerous in a way I can't articulate. Not dangerous like a bear or a cliff edge, but dangerous like a black hole or radiation, something that violates the natural laws we take for granted. It's been 6 months now, and the dreams have finally started to fade. But sometimes, when I'm drifting off to sleep, I swear I can hear the silence of that dead zone pressing against my ears, and I wonder if somewhere in those unexplored mountains, that boundary is still there, still perfect, still waiting, and I wonder if it's expanding, inch by inch, day by day, and what happens when it reaches us. Story 16. I still get chills thinking about what happened in my dad's Portland house. It's been about 10 years, but the memory is etched into my brain like it happened yesterday. I've barely told anyone because it sounds so ridiculous when I say it out loud, but I swear every word of this is true. Back in 2011, I was living in my dad's house while he was basically moved in with his girlfriend Sandra across town. It was this old 2-story home in a quiet neighborhood, not particularly creepy or anything, just a regular house built in the 70s with a finished basement. Dad had bought it when I was in high school, and when I finished college but couldn't afford my own place yet, he offered to let me stay there rent-free while I saved up. It was a sweet deal. Dad and Sandra would stop by maybe once a week to grab mail or check on things, but otherwise, I had the place to myself. The laundry room was in the basement, washer, dryer, some storage shelves, and a small workspace where Dad kept his tools. This particular day was a Wednesday in March. I remember because I'd called in sick to my receptionist job, but was actually just burned out and needed a mental health day. Around 2 in the afternoon, I was sitting at my desk in the spare bedroom with my headphones on, catching up on some side project work I was doing for a friend's website. The house was completely silent, except for my music. Dad and Sandra had left for the coast 3 days before for a week-long vacation. I was alone, or so I thought. I'd been working for maybe an hour when I heard it. Despite having my headphones on, I caught this distinctive metallic clunk. If you've ever owned a front-loading washing machine, you know that sound. It's the door shutting, that hollow, echoing thud that resonates through the house. I paused my music and pulled my headphones off. At first, I wasn't alarmed, just confused. I figured maybe Dad and Sandra had come back early and she was doing laundry. Sandra always did laundry when she visited. She thought I didn't know how to properly wash clothes. So I sat there listening. That's when I heard the sound of wet clothes being tossed into the dryer. That wet slapping sound that's unmistakable. Then came the click, click, click of someone turning the cycle knob, followed by the button being pushed in. Within seconds, the dryer started rumbling. I called out, "Hello, Sandra?" No answer. I figured she just couldn't hear me from the basement, so I went back to work, planning to say hi when she came upstairs. About 30 minutes later, I heard the dryer buzzer go off. Then came the sound of the dryer door opening and clothes being pulled out and folded, that rhythmic rustling noise of fabric being shaken out and laid flat. I remember thinking it was weird that Sandra hadn't come up to say hello yet, but sometimes she got in these moods where she just wanted to clean and not talk to anyone. I kept working. Then I heard something that made me stop typing mid-sentence. The sound of a plastic laundry basket being dragged across the concrete basement floor. It was that distinctive scraping noise. followed by footsteps coming up the wooden basement stairs. I swiveled in my chair, facing my open bedroom door, waiting for Sandra to appear in the hallway with her basket of folded laundry. The footsteps reached the top of the stairs. The basement door should have opened, but it didn't. The footsteps just stopped. No door opening, no one appearing, nothing. "Sandra," I called out again, louder this time. Silence. A chill ran down my spine as I got up from my chair. I walked down the hallway to the top of the main stairs and looked down into the living room. No one was there. The basement door was closed. "Hello? Is someone here?" My voice sounded small and shaky even to my own ears. Nothing. I went downstairs and checked the front and back doors. Both locked. All windows secure. No cars in the driveway except mine. I stood in the kitchen, my heart starting to pound as I stared at the closed basement door. I'm not typically a fearful person. I've watched horror movies alone at night since I was 12 and never had issues staying by myself in the house. But something about this felt deeply wrong. I knew what I'd heard. I hadn't imagined it. I grabbed a knife from the kitchen drawer, just in case, and approached the basement door. My hand was actually trembling as I turned the knob. I flicked on the light switch and peered down the stairs. "Hello? Is anyone down there?" My voice echoed in the empty stairwell. No response. I took a deep breath and descended the stairs, knife clutched in my sweaty hand. The basement looked completely normal. No laundry basket at the bottom of the stairs. No pile of folded clothes. The laundry room door was open, light off. I stepped into the laundry room and flicked on the light. The washing machine door was closed. The dryer was closed. I reached out and touched both machines. They were ice cold, not even slightly warm, like they hadn't been used in days, which made sense because I'd done my laundry on Sunday, 3 days earlier. I opened both machines, empty. Not a sock, not a drop of water, nothing. I checked behind the machines. I looked in the storage room. I even checked inside the small bathroom down there. No one. Nothing out of place. No sign that anyone had been there at all. But I had heard it all. The entire laundry process from start to finish, clear as day, despite having headphones on for part of it. My hands shaking, I pulled out my phone and called my dad. "Hey, sweetie, what's up?" He sounded relaxed, happy. "Dad, are you guys back from the coast?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "No, we're still in Cannon Beach. Everything okay? Is Sandra there with you?" My voice was tight. "Of course she is. We're about to go out for dinner. Jess, what's wrong?" I swallowed hard. I think someone was in the house. I heard someone doing laundry in the basement." "What? Are you sure?" "Positive. I heard the washing machine, the dryer, someone folding clothes, walking up the stairs." "But you didn't see anyone?" "No. And the machines are cold. There's no laundry. But Dad, I swear I heard everything. Every single sound." There was a long pause on the other end. "Did you check all the doors and windows?" he finally asked. "Yes, everything's locked. My car is the only one here." "Who else has a key to the house?" I asked. "Just me, you, and Sandra, and the spare in the garage lockbox, but you'd need the code for that." "Could anyone have gotten the code?" "I don't see how. Look." I glanced around the empty basement once more. "No, there's no one here now, but I know what I heard. Maybe it was the neighbors' machines? Sound can travel weirdly sometimes." But we both knew that wasn't possible. Our nearest neighbors were too far away, and besides, I'd heard the footsteps on our stairs. "Why don't you go to a friend's place tonight?" Dad suggested. "We'll be back on Sunday." That's exactly what I did. I packed an overnight bag, locked up the house, and stayed with my friend Megan for 2 nights. I told her I had a plumbing issue. I couldn't bring myself to explain what really happened. When I returned to the house on Friday, everything was normal. No strange sounds, no evidence of anyone having been there. But I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched whenever I was near the basement door. I started bringing my laundry to a laundromat. I moved everything I kept in the basement, winter clothes, old yearbooks, my camping gear, up to the spare bedroom closet. For the remaining time I lived there, I never went into the basement alone again. If I absolutely had to go down there, I'd call a friend to come over first. Dad and Sandra never took my experience seriously. They suggested it was just the house settling, or my imagination, or a vivid auditory hallucination from being sick. But I know what I heard. Every single sound was crystal clear and exactly what you'd hear during a normal laundry cycle, from start to finish. The strangest part? About 6 months later, I overheard Sandra telling my dad that she couldn't find her favorite blue sweater anywhere. She said, "I know I was doing a load with it right before we left for Cannon Beach, but it's like it just disappeared." Dad told her she must have left it somewhere else, but the look on her face, she was genuinely confused. Dad sold the house in 2014 when he and Sandra decided to move in together officially. I helped them with the move, but never told the new owners about what happened. What would I even say? By the way, sometimes you might hear someone doing laundry, but when you check, no one's there and the machines are cold? They'd think I was crazy. I've spent years trying to rationalize what happened. Carbon monoxide. But there were no other symptoms, and it never happened again. A break-in, but nothing was taken, and all doors were locked. Just my imagination? I don't think so. The sounds were too specific, too sequential, too real. Sometimes I wonder if time somehow folded in on itself that day. If I was hearing Sandra doing laundry from a different point in time. Or maybe the house had its own routines, its own memory of the people who lived there and the chores they did. All I know is that I heard someone, or something, doing laundry in an empty house, and to this day, I can't explain it. I still avoid basement laundry rooms whenever possible, and the sound of a washing machine door closing still makes my blood run cold. Story 17. I've always been the type who needs to escape civilization every now and then. The noise, the people, the constant notifications. Sometimes it all becomes too much. That's why I planned a solo camping trip to a remote canyon in the Sonoran Desert last month. I wanted true isolation. No cell service, no hikers, no reminders of the modern world. Just me and the desert. I left my apartment at 4 in the morning on a Tuesday, driving 2.5 hours before the sun even came up. The further I got from the city, the more the tension in my shoulders started to ease. By the time I reached the unmarked dirt road turnoff, I felt like I could finally breathe again. I parked at what barely qualified as a trailhead, just a widened area of dirt with no facilities or signage. That was exactly what I wanted. I double-checked my backpack. 3 gallons of water, lightweight tent, sleeping bag rated for desert nights, first aid kit, dehydrated meals, headlamp, extra batteries, map, compass, knife, and the other essentials. I'd done this enough times to know what I needed, but not enough times in this particular area to feel completely comfortable. The hike was brutal in the best way possible. I deliberately chose a route that would discourage casual hikers. No established trail, just rough terrain that required scrambling over rock formations and navigating around barrel cacti and thorny mesquite. The physical exertion felt good, burning away the mental fog that had been clouding my mind for weeks. By mid-afternoon, the temperature had climbed to around 100 degrees. The sun beat down mercilessly, and I'd already gone through half of my water for the day. I needed to find a suitable campsite soon. After cresting a particularly steep section, I spotted a promising ridge with a small rock outcropping that could provide some wind protection. Perfect. I dropped my pack with relief and surveyed the area. The view was spectacular, miles of untouched desert stretching to distant, purple mountains. Not another human in sight. This was exactly what I needed. The ground was littered with smaller rocks that would make sleeping uncomfortable, so I started clearing a flat area for my tent. I was moving methodically, picking up rocks and tossing them aside, when I noticed what looked like a piece of black plastic under one of the larger stones. Thinking it was trash left by a previous hiker, which always infuriates me, I reached down to grab it. As my fingers brushed against it, the plastic moved. I jerked my hand back as adrenaline shot through my body. It wasn't plastic. It was a scorpion, and not just any scorpion, but a massive one, nearly the size of my palm. Its body was a dark brownish black with pincers that had an orangish tint in the sunlight. The scorpion was curled up defensively, its tail twisted at an odd angle at the base. I realized with horror that I might have stepped on it while clearing the area. Though I hadn't been stung, the thought of how close I'd come made my stomach drop. I was at least 4 hours from my car and probably another 2 hours from any kind of medical help. A scorpion sting out here could mean excruciating pain, swelling, vomiting, potentially even a life-threatening situation if I couldn't hike out. Using a nearby stick, I carefully moved the injured scorpion away from my campsite, trying to place it somewhere sheltered where it might recover. As I watched it slowly crawl under a rock, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just had an extremely close call. The encounter left me rattled. Every rustle in the brush made me twitch as I finished setting up camp. I found myself scanning the ground constantly, imagining scorpions under every rock. When I sat down to prepare my dehydrated pasta dinner, I checked and rechecked the ground around me before putting my cooking pot down. As the sun set, the temperature dropped rapidly, and I retreated to my tent. I zipped the door closed tightly, even though I knew scorpions could easily climb the fabric if they wanted to. I tried to read my book by headlamp, but couldn't focus. Every shadow, every slight movement of the tent fabric in the wind made me tense up. I eventually fell into a restless sleep, but my dreams were troubled. I kept feeling phantom sensations of insects crawling on my skin. Several times I jolted awake, sweating and disoriented, convinced there was something in my sleeping bag. Each time I'd check with my headlamp, finding nothing but still unable to shake the creeping sensation. By morning, I was exhausted and on edge. I decided to relocate my camp to somewhere I might feel safer. I packed up and hiked several miles further up the canyon, eventually finding a flatter area near some large boulders that offered better visibility of the ground and fewer hiding places for desert creatures. Setting up my second camp, I was obsessively careful. I used my trekking pole to turn over every rock before touching it. I cleared a large perimeter around my tent, making sure there were no crevices or holes nearby where scorpions might hide. I even placed my boots inside a sealed plastic bag after thoroughly checking them. The rest of the day passed uneventfully, but my hypervigilance remained. Every stick looked like a scorpion tail. Every shadow contained potential danger. I kept my headlamp on even during daylight hours, shining it into dark spaces before reaching in. The isolation that I'd sought now felt threatening, rather than peaceful. That night, I slept slightly better, but still woke frequently. The desert is never truly silent. There's always the rustle of nocturnal animals, the whisper of wind through cacti, the occasional distant howl of a coyote. Each sound triggered my alertness, making true rest impossible. On the third morning, something happened that I still can't explain. I woke at first light and reached for my boots, which I'd left neatly side by side just outside my tent door. But my left boot wasn't there. After a moment of confusion, I spotted it several feet away from where I'd left it. My first thought was that an animal had dragged it away, maybe a coyote or fox attracted by the scent, but nothing else in my camp had been disturbed. My food bag hanging from a nearby tree was untouched. My cooking equipment was exactly as I'd left it. When I retrieved the boot and examined the area, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. In the fine desert dust were what appeared to be human barefoot prints. They weren't clear impressions, just slight disturbances in the dust that formed the outline of a foot. They were smaller than mine would be, and they didn't lead anywhere that made sense. They just appeared near my boot and then vanished. I told myself I was being paranoid. The wind could have created those patterns. Maybe I'd moved the boot myself in the night during a bathroom break and didn't remember. But combined with the scorpion incident, it was enough to convince me to cut my trip short. What had started as a peaceful retreat had become an exercise in sustained anxiety. I decided to stay one more night since it was already midday and I didn't want to hike out in the afternoon heat. But I couldn't relax. I built a small fire as the sun set, something I rarely do when solo camping due to the effort and fire danger. I sat with my back against one of the boulders, knife within reach, watching the darkness gather around my little circle of light. I didn't sleep that night. Every sound from the darkness seemed amplified. A branch breaking in the distance became a footstep. The wind whistling through rock formations became whispers. I kept my headlamp on until the batteries began to fade, then switched to my backup. By the time the sky began to lighten with dawn, my eyes were burning from exhaustion. I packed up as quickly as possible and began the long hike back to my car. The desert looked different in the morning light, beautiful but unforgiving. I kept a brutal pace, wanting only to return to civilization and safety. When I finally reached my car, I threw my pack in the trunk and drove straight home without stopping. The familiar surroundings of my apartment should have been comforting, but I still felt on edge as I unpacked my gear. That's when I found it. As I was emptying sand from my boots and preparing to store them, something small and dried fell out of the toe of my left boot, the same boot that had mysteriously moved. It was a tiny scorpion, no larger than my thumbnail, completely desiccated as if it had been dead for some time. I stared at it for what felt like hours. Had it been in there the whole time? Had I narrowly escaped being stung not once but twice? Or had someone or something placed it there deliberately? I've been camping many times since then, but never alone and never in that particular canyon. I stay closer to established trails now. I always check my equipment meticulously, a habit born from standing on the thin line between control and chaos in the desert that day. Sometimes I still wake up with that crawling sensation on my skin, and sometimes, when I'm drifting off to sleep, I swear I can hear the sound of bare feet padding across my floor. Story 18. I still don't sleep well when spring comes around. It's been almost 7 years since that night in the forest outside my village, but the memory of what we found there hasn't faded at all. I've tried talking to psychologists, priests, even a paranormal investigator once, though I felt stupid immediately after. But nothing helps. I just need to get this off my chest, so maybe writing about it will help. I grew up in a small village in western Serbia, about 40 kilometers from the Bosnian border. It's a beautiful place most of the time. Rolling hills, dense forests, clean air. The kind of place city people romanticize without understanding the isolation that comes with it. Our village has maybe 300 people, many of them elderly. Most young people leave for Belgrade or abroad as soon as they can. I was 23 at the time and still living at home, working at my uncle's mechanic shop while saving money to move to the city. That spring, we were celebrating Đurđevdan, St. George's Day. It's a big deal in our region, marking the arrival of spring. Traditionally, people decorate their homes with flowers, prepare special food, and sometimes even sleep outside to absorb the fresh spring energy or whatever. My friends and I had our own tradition, camping in the woods about 2 kilometers from the village. That year, there were 6 of us: me, Nicola, my best friend Marco, his girlfriend Anna, my cousin Petar, and 2 other guys from nearby villages, Stefan and Milos. We'd known each other since childhood, except for Milos, who'd moved to the area about 2 years earlier. We set up camp in our usual clearing around 4 in the afternoon. The weather was perfect, warm but not hot, with a light breeze. We built a fire pit, pitched 3 tents, and started drinking rakia, homemade plum brandy, while catching up. Nothing unusual at first. Around sunset, we realized we needed more firewood. Marco and I volunteered to gather some, since we were the least drunk. We took our phone flashlights and headed deeper into the forest, still joking and laughing. The woods got denser as we walked, which wasn't surprising, but something felt different that evening. The bird sounds had stopped completely. At first, I didn't notice, but after about 15 minutes of walking, the silence hit me. Spring evenings in those woods are usually noisy with birds and insects, but suddenly there was nothing except the sound of our footsteps and breathing. "It's quiet," I said to Marco. He nodded, looking around. "Too quiet. Maybe a storm's coming." But the sky was clear from what we could see through the trees. We continued, gathering sticks and branches, gradually moving further apart as we searched. I was maybe 20 meters from Marco when I spotted a clearing ahead with what looked like a massive dead oak tree in the center. Something about it drew me closer. The tree must have been ancient before it died, easily 20 meters tall with sprawling bare branches reaching out like skeletal arms. As I approached, I noticed something strange at the top of the tree. At first, I thought it was just a large clump of leaves or maybe an abandoned nest, but as I got closer, I realized it was something much bigger. "Marco," I called out, "come see this." He joined me a minute later, arms full of branches. "What is it?" I pointed up. "Tell me I'm not seeing things." He dropped the wood and squinted upward. "What the fuck?" There, at the very top of the tree, was a sheep, a fully grown sheep, leaning slightly to the left side of the uppermost branch. Even in the fading light, we could see it clearly. Its white wool stood out against the darkening sky. "How is that possible?" Marco whispered. "Did someone put it there as a joke?" I shook my head, trying to process what I was seeing. "The tree's too tall. You'd need a crane or something." We circled the tree, keeping our distance. From different angles, we could see that the sheep appeared to be impaled on one of the branches. A thick, spear-like branch was protruding from its side, but that made even less sense. The sheep showed no signs of decomposition or predator damage. Its wool was clean and white. It looked like it had been placed there that very day. "Maybe it fell from a plane," Marco suggested, but his voice made it clear he didn't believe that himself. I took out my phone to take a picture, but when I tried, my phone shut down despite having over 50% battery. Marco tried with his phone too, with the same result. We both looked at each other, a chill running down my spine that had nothing to do with the evening air. "Let's get back to camp," I said, suddenly feeling exposed. "We have enough wood." As we hurried back, neither of us spoke much. The silence in the forest seemed heavier now, oppressive. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone following us, though I couldn't explain why. When we reached camp, everyone immediately noticed something was wrong. We probably looked like we'd seen a ghost. "What happened to you two?" Petar asked, handing us each a beer. We explained what we'd seen. At first, they thought we were joking or trying to scare them. Stefan suggested we all go back to see it, but neither Marco nor I wanted to return, and it was getting too dark anyway. "It's probably just some farmer's idea of a joke," Stefan said, but I could tell he was unsettled too. Milos, who had been quiet until then, suddenly spoke up. "Was it near the big clearing with the split rock?" I nodded, surprised. "Yeah, how did you know?" He took a long drink from his bottle before answering. "I've heard stories about that place. My grandmother warned me about it when I moved here." "What kind of stories?" Anna asked, moving closer to the fire as if seeking protection. Milos shrugged, trying to seem casual. "Just old village superstitions. They say that part of the forest is different, that things happen there that can't be explained." "Like dead sheep in trees?" Marco attempted to joke, but his laugh sounded forced. "Among other things," Milos replied. "My grandmother mentioned livestock being found in impossible places. She said it was a warning." "A warning of what?" I pressed. She wouldn't say exactly, just that we should stay away from that part of the woods, especially around Jurjevdan. The conversation moved on after that, but the mood had changed. We drank more than usual that night, probably trying to shake off the unease. I remember looking into the darkness beyond our campfire and feeling like something was watching us. I told myself it was just the alcohol and the power of suggestion. We eventually went to sleep around 2 in the morning. I shared a tent with Petar, but I couldn't fall asleep. Every sound, the wind in the trees, animals moving in the underbrush, made me tense up. Around 4 in the morning, I heard something that made my blood freeze. It was a sound like heavy branches being dragged across the ground, coming from the direction where Marco and I had seen the tree. The sound moved slowly around our campsite, circling us. I wanted to wake Petar, but I was paralyzed with fear. The dragging continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes. Then silence returned. When morning finally came, I was exhausted, but relieved. No one else mentioned hearing anything unusual during the night, and I didn't bring it up. We packed up quickly and headed back to the village earlier than planned, making excuses about work and family obligations. 2 days later, I ran into Ivan, a guy I used to be friends with before we had a falling out over some stupid teenage drama. We were both at the local store, and he mentioned he'd been camping with some friends in the same forest, but further north. "You know what's weird?" he said, seemingly forgetting our past issues. "We found a dead goat stuck high up in a pine tree. Freaked us all out." My heart started racing. "When was this?" 2 nights ago. Same night you guys were there, right?" I nodded, unable to speak for a moment. Did you hear anything strange that night? Like dragging sounds?" Ivan gave me an odd look. "No, but Starivuk was there the next morning." Starivuk, Old Wolf, was the nickname for an elderly man who lived alone at the edge of our village. He was in his 80s, kept to himself, and was the subject of many local rumors. Some said he practiced old pagan rituals, others that he was just a harmless eccentric. I'd always found him unsettling, with his piercing blue eyes and the way he seemed to appear out of nowhere. "What was he doing there?" I asked. "Just walking around, looking at the ground like he was searching for something. When he saw us, he warned us not to come back to the forest until after the new moon." Ivan shrugged. Crazy old man. After that conversation, I started asking subtle questions around the village about the forest and Stary Vuk. Most people dismissed my concerns, but my boss at the garage, Dragan, told me something that made me wish I'd never asked. "That forest has always been strange," he said while we were fixing a tractor engine. "My brother owns land near there, tried to farm it about 5 years ago. Found a pentagram drawn in the soil one morning, made of some dark powder. He ignored it, thought it was just kids playing around." Dragan wiped his hands on a rag, his expression serious. "Nothing would grow on that land for a year afterward, not a single crop. The soil tested normal, no pests, perfect weather, but nothing grew. He sold the land last year. I've spent years trying to find logical explanations for what we saw. Maybe hunters put the sheep there somehow, though I can't imagine why or how. Maybe it was an elaborate prank by someone in the village. Maybe Stary Vuk was involved, though he'd have needed help to lift a sheep that high. But none of these explanations feel right. The pristine condition of the sheep, the impossible placement, our phones dying, the dragging sounds in the night, and the fact that Ivan found something similar the same night. I moved to Belgrade a few months after that incident. I couldn't stay in that village knowing what might be happening in those woods. Marco left too, though we never really talked about that night again. Some things are better left undiscussed. I heard from my mother that Stary Vuk died last winter. The villagers found strange symbols carved into his cabin walls when they cleared out his belongings. And 3 sheep disappeared from a farm near the forest that same week. I still don't know what forces are at work in those woods. I don't want to know. But sometimes, when spring comes around and Jurjevdan approaches, I wake up in the middle of the night thinking I can hear that dragging sound outside my apartment window, 16 floors up in the middle of the city.